Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Tonight, I invite you to journey deep into the sun-scorched heart of the Nevada desert, where winds whisper across dry lake beds and jagged mountains cast long shadows across an endless sea of dust. A place where the sky seems too wide, too blue, as if it's hiding something just beyond the clouds. Beneath this vast, open expanse lies one of the most secretive locations in modern history, a place wrapped in silence, guarded by law and legend, shrouded in mystery. This is the story of Area 51. It is a story born in the anxious days of the Cold War, a time of spies and satellites, of classified black projects and experimental aircraft that could outrun radar and reason. A time when secrecy was not just a strategy, but survival. But this story is not only one of technology and war. It is also a tale of myths and whispers, of flying saucers and captured beings, of hidden tunnels and vanishing truths, of government denials and the people who believed what they saw anyway. Over the next few hours, we'll trace the strange and fascinating journey of Area 51. From its earliest origins and top-secret beginnings to the conspiracies, controversies, and cultural legends that have grown around it like desert thorns. Before we begin, I'd love it if you could take a moment to comment where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you there. It's always amazing to see how people from every corner of the globe gather here each night, drawn together by story and curiosity. Now, set your phone to Do Not Disturb. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum. Adjust your blanket, find a position that feels just right, and allow yourself to settle into stillness. There's nothing you need to do right now. No tasks, no emails, no headlines. For the next 2 hours or more, your only job is to listen. Let the words unfold. Let the mystery drift around you like desert air, and let your imagination follow wherever it wants to go. The truth, as they say, is out there. But for now, there is only you and the story. So, take one last breath and prepare to fall asleep to the entire story of Area 51, from secret skies to shadows and stars. The birth of a secret base. In the quiet aftermath of World War II, as the dust of global conflict began to settle, a new kind of tension emerged. One colder, quieter, and far more complex. It was the beginning of what would come to be known as the Cold War, a period not defined by full-scale battles or invading armies, but by suspicion, surveillance, and the looming threat of nuclear annihilation. The world had split along ideological lines, with the United States and the Soviet Union locked in a game of shadows. Information, not just arms, became the most precious currency of power. It was within this atmosphere of paranoia and ambition that the seeds of Area 51 were planted. The United States government had learned during the war that the skies could no longer be taken for granted. With the advent of radar, long-range bombers, and the atomic bomb, the space above had become just as strategic as the ground below. And in this new age, the ability to see what the enemy was doing before they acted became paramount. In the early 1950s, reports began to circulate that the Soviet Union was developing advanced military technology at a frightening pace. American military intelligence needed a way to observe these developments without detection, something faster, higher, and stealthier than anything the world had yet seen. The Central Intelligence Agency, still in its infancy at the time, partnered with the US Air Force and a secretive division of Lockheed known as Skunk Works to pursue a bold and nearly impossible idea: to create a reconnaissance aircraft capable of flying so high and so fast that it could remain invisible to radar and out of reach of enemy fire. But such a project couldn't be built or tested just anywhere. It required total isolation, extreme discretion, and open skies far from prying eyes. A search began for the perfect location. Survey teams combed through the western United States, analyzing maps and terrain, looking for a place remote enough to host an unacknowledged airbase, somewhere removed from commercial air traffic, civilian populations, and press access. Eventually they found it, a flat, dry lakebed nestled within the Nevada desert, surrounded on all sides by barren mountains and federally controlled land. The place was known as Groom Lake. To the untrained eye, Groom Lake was unremarkable, a wide, chalky expanse of cracked earth and silence. But to military planners and engineers, it was ideal. Its hard-packed natural runway stretched for miles, offering a perfect testing surface. Its isolation meant security could be maintained with relative ease, and its proximity to the Nevada test site, where nuclear weapons were already being detonated in secret, meant that activity in the area wouldn't raise additional suspicion. In 1955, with little fanfare and zero public acknowledgement, the site was quietly annexed for the use of the CIA and Lockheed. It was given a designation on military maps, Watertown, named after the hometown of CIA Director Allen Dulles. Later, it would be known by its grid number, Area 51. Construction began under the tightest security imaginable. Only a small group of engineers, technicians, and military personnel were brought in, flown to the site under strict confidentiality. The airstrip was extended. Temporary housing and hangars were built. Every truckload of material, every tool, every bolt was accounted for. All personnel were briefed not just on the secrecy of their work, but on the fact that the site, officially, did not exist. Workers slept in rudimentary quarters, shielded from the outside world. Communication was restricted. Travel in and out of the area was heavily monitored. And as the sun beat down on the silent expanse of sand and concrete, something extraordinary began to take shape. The purpose of the base, even to those working there, was often obscured. Many were told they were part of a weather project. Others believed they were supporting nuclear research. In truth, what was being prepared was the testing of the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft, a plane designed to reach altitudes above 70,000 feet, where it could fly undetected over enemy territory and bring back photographs with astonishing clarity. But the U-2 would not fly yet. That chapter, the dawn of flight at Area 51, was still just beyond the horizon. For now, the desert remained quiet, its secret not yet in motion, its history not yet fully begun. What mattered most in these early days was not what flew above Groom Lake, but the silence that surrounded it. The silence was deliberate, strategic, and it would come to define everything that followed. The creation of Area 51 was not simply the building of a base. It was the beginning of an entirely new approach to national security, one that embraced secrecy not as a necessity, but as a foundation, a place where the line between science and speculation, between truth and denial, would blur for decades to come. Even in those first days, there was an awareness, perhaps unspoken, that this place would never be ordinary. It would live in the shadows. It would hide things not just from enemies, but from the public it served. And it would forever be a magnet for curiosity, fear, and wonder. A base born of Cold War necessity, now standing as a legend of the unknown, Groom Lake and Project Aquatone. By early 1955, the dry, sun-baked expanse of Groom Lake had become more than just a remote patch of desert. It had become the nerve center of a daring, high-stakes experiment, an invisible theater where science, strategy, and secrecy would converge under the cloak of national security. Officially, nothing existed there. Unofficially, what was unfolding would alter the course of the Cold War and aviation history alike. At the heart of this unfolding chapter was a single project, known only to a select few by its codename, Project Aquatone. Aquatone wasn't just a program, it was a calculated response to a rapidly escalating arms race. Since the end of World War II, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union had grown steadily colder, more opaque, and more dangerous. Though the Iron Curtain divided Europe physically and ideologically, What lay beyond it remained frustratingly unclear. Intelligence on Soviet missile capabilities, military movements, and nuclear stockpiles was scarce, and what little there was came from intercepted communications and defectors' testimonies, neither of which could offer the visual, detailed confirmations military planners required. What the US needed was a new kind of eye in the sky. Traditional reconnaissance aircraft had become vulnerable in the modern age. They flew too low, too slow, and too predictably. Soviet radar systems were improving rapidly, and anti-aircraft weapons were being developed at alarming speeds. Any attempt to gather intelligence from Soviet airspace risked the loss of planes, pilots, and global credibility. A new approach was essential, one that would take espionage above and beyond existing limitations. The answer came from Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, specifically from a secretive subdivision headed by the brilliant and notoriously unconventional engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson. Known for his ability to deliver ambitious designs under impossible deadlines, Johnson and his team at Skunk Works were already legends within aviation circles. But even for them, the challenge ahead was formidable. Design and build an aircraft that could fly at altitudes above 70,000 feet, high enough to escape the reach of Soviet interceptors and virtually all known surface-to-air missiles. This aircraft would need to be light but durable, high-flying but stable, and fast, but not necessarily supersonic. Its true weapon would be its height. Flying above the stratosphere, the plane would be nearly invisible to radar. It would not be armed. Its only purpose would be to see, to observe, document, and return with information that no satellite could yet provide. The CIA approved the project, working in tandem with the US Air Force and Lockheed. The code name was chosen carefully, Aquatone, derived not from its function, but to mislead anyone who might catch wind of it. It sounded harmless, even abstract. But behind that innocuous name was a project that would require total invisibility, and that meant the place where it was tested had to be just as hidden. That's where Groom Lake came in. The site, having been recently selected and cleared in secret, was ready to host its first real mission. In the spring of 1955, construction crews began to expand the facilities to accommodate the project's ambitious needs. New runways were carved out of the salt flat. Hangars were assembled with prefabricated parts flown in under heavy guard. Mobile housing units were installed, workshops were set up, and the first signs of a permanent base began to take shape, though it would still be years before the base was anything close to comfortable. Aircraft and equipment were shipped in pieces, labeled under false designations. Engineers and support personnel were flown in on unmarked planes. Some were told they were working on weather experiments. Others were instructed to tell no one, not even family members, where they were or what they were doing. The veil of secrecy was absolute. To support the flights and data collection for Aquatone, a small fleet of C-54 transport planes began ferrying crews between the base and Burbank, California, Lockheed's home base, under the cover of what became known as the Janet flights. These flights departed from a discreet terminal at Las Vegas's McCarran Airport and remain in operation today, shuttling personnel in and out of the base without a trace on public records. Within months, the desert was alive with activity. Work was round the clock, fueled by caffeine, adrenaline, and the quiet pressure of knowing the world might depend on their success. Technicians worked tirelessly to assemble the prototype. The design that emerged from Kelly Johnson's team was radical. The aircraft's wings were long and slender, almost glider-like, to support high-altitude flight. Its fuselage was thin and light, composed of exotic materials like titanium and special aluminum alloys. To save weight, the U-2, as it was later named, lacked ejection seats or heavy onboard systems. Its engine was stripped down for efficiency at altitude, and its systems were optimized for cruising in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, where air pressure was almost non-existent. Test pilots underwent special training to prepare for the unique conditions they would face. At 70,000 feet, even a minor malfunction could be fatal. The pilots wore pressurized flight suits akin to those worn by astronauts. If the cabin depressurized at that altitude, loss of consciousness would occur in seconds. Flying the U-2 was unlike flying any traditional aircraft. It was sensitive, vulnerable to wind shear, and had the gliding capabilities of a leaf. Landing was especially difficult. The aircraft floated above the runway with stubborn resistance, making touchdowns an art form in themselves. On August 1st, 1955, the first official U-2 test flight lifted off from Groom Lake. The moment marked not only the birth of a new kind of spy plane, but also the beginning of Area 51's reputation as a place where aviation technology advanced faster than anywhere else on Earth. In the months that followed, the U-2 was refined, tested, and quietly deployed. Its reconnaissance flights over Soviet airspace brought back some of the clearest images ever captured of military installations, nuclear facilities, and industrial complexes. Images that shaped US foreign policy in the tense years to come. But with success came consequences. As soon as the U-2 began flying missions near or over the Soviet Union, radar operators began picking up faint signatures at extreme altitudes they believed were unreachable. The Soviet military, confused and concerned, began developing new anti-air systems in response. Though the plane could fly higher than any known interceptor, it wasn't invisible, just unreachable for now. Still, the US government denied everything. Every overflight was dismissed, every blurry photograph ignored. Even when sightings of strange, high-flying aircraft began trickling in from civilians and commercial pilots, the official story never changed. The U-2 didn't exist. Area 51 didn't exist. Project Aquatone was never spoken of outside closed, windowless rooms. This secrecy began shaping the very architecture of Groom Lake. Everything was compartmentalized. Engineers worked on parts of the aircraft without knowing how the whole system functioned. Pilots were isolated from mechanics, and information flowed only in one direction, downward. Security personnel were instructed not just to guard the perimeter, but to actively mislead. Disinformation campaigns became standard. Access badges changed weekly. Communications were encrypted. Surveillance teams monitored the surrounding area for curious civilians, including hikers or journalists. Anyone who wandered too close was turned away, often without explanation. Over time, this culture of secrecy hardened into something permanent, an atmosphere that would come to define Area 51 itself. More than a base, it became a myth factory. People knew something was happening in the desert, but no one could say what, and that uncertainty gave birth to rumors that would last for decades. But in these early years, before the aliens, before the conspiracies, before the viral videos and Storm the Gates memes, Area 51 was simply a crucible of engineering, a secret laboratory where physics was pushed to its limits under the dry Nevada sun. Project Aquatone achieved its goal. The U-2 flew. It photographed what could not be seen. It offered a glimpse into the heart of the Soviet machine, and in doing so prevented conflict by removing the fog of ignorance. Yet its very success demanded more. Faster planes, higher altitudes, deeper secrets. The Cold War wasn't going away, and neither was the need for eyes in the sky. And so, as the U-2 quietly entered service and the Soviets began adapting, the engineers at Groom Lake looked to the future. Already, blueprints were being drafted for something faster, something more advanced. But that would be another chapter, another shadow cast across the sands of Nevada. For now, Project Aquatone was complete, and the base, still unnamed on any public map, had found its purpose. A place where the sky was not the limit, but merely the beginning. Black Projects and Skunk Works, Lockheed's role in developing the A-12 and SR-71 Blackbird. By the late 1950s, the world was changing fast, and not just politically. Science and technology were racing forward with a kind of urgency rarely seen in human history. The Cold War was no longer a simmering tension. It was a furnace fed by suspicion, espionage, and the constant threat of nuclear escalation. In this atmosphere, knowledge was power, and the ability to gather that knowledge from the skies remained an urgent national priority. The success of the U-2 had been both a triumph and a warning. While it provided invaluable intelligence to US leaders, it had also revealed a sobering truth. The altitude advantage wouldn't last forever. Soviet radar systems were becoming more precise, their missiles more accurate, and despite years of denials, the world would soon witness the vulnerability of high-altitude reconnaissance firsthand. On May 1, 1960, a U-2 flown by CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. It was a wake-up call. The aircraft had been flying at over 68,000 feet, once considered untouchable, but a SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missile brought it down. Powers survived, was captured, and paraded before the world in a dramatic Soviet propaganda move. The US government was forced to admit the existence of its spy flights. It was a diplomatic embarrassment, but more importantly, it proved that the U-2 had become obsolete in the eyes of military planners. Something better was needed, something faster, stealthier, more elusive than anything the skies had yet seen. And once again, the answer would come from Lockheed's Skunk Works, the same secretive team that had produced the U-2. Led still by the incomparable Clarence Kelly Johnson, the Skunk Works team was already anticipating this next chapter. Even before the Powers incident, Johnson had argued that speed would be the future of reconnaissance. If an aircraft could not hide by flying higher, perhaps it could hide by moving too fast to be caught. This idea became the foundation for a new program, Oxcart, the code name for a revolutionary aircraft designed not just to outrun radar and missiles, but to effectively vanish into the fabric of the sky. From the very beginning, Project Oxcart was cloaked in deeper secrecy than even the U-2. While the CIA would once again be the primary customer, the development effort was nested behind layers of classification, obscured from nearly everyone except a tightly vetted circle of engineers, intelligence officers, and flight crews. The name Area 51, still not publicly acknowledged, would become the testbed for this extraordinary project. The first aircraft to emerge from this effort was called the A-12. Its shape alone marked a dramatic departure from everything that had flown before. Sleek, sharp, and futuristic, it was built from the ground up for speed and stealth. The A-12 wasn't just a plane, it was a leap into the future of aviation. The demands of this new aircraft required Lockheed's engineers to solve problems that no one had encountered before. The A-12 would fly at over Mach 3, more than 3 times the speed of sound, and at altitudes exceeding 85,000 feet. At that velocity, friction from the air alone would generate temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Fahrenheit on the plane's surface. Traditional materials would melt or deform. Conventional designs would fail. To survive these extremes, the A-12 had to be built using titanium, a rare and difficult metal that was lightweight, heat-resistant, and hard to work with. Incredibly, much of the titanium used in the A-12 project had to be sourced from the Soviet Union, America's adversary, through front companies and intermediaries so as not to reveal its purpose. But materials were only one challenge. The entire aerodynamic profile had to be reimagined. At such speeds, air doesn't flow over wings in predictable ways. Engineers had to account for shock waves, thermal expansion, engine airflow distortions, and fuel cooling. The A-12 would grow in flight due to heating, so it had to be built with intentional gaps that would seal shut once the fuselage expanded mid-mission. Its fuel, JP-7, was so unique that it required chemical additives to ignite and special procedures to handle. Even fueling the aircraft became a science experiment. Its twin Pratt & Whitney J58 engines were a marvel in their own right. These turbo ramjets could operate in conventional jet mode at takeoff and transition into partial ramjet mode at high speeds, something no other plane had ever done. The result was an aircraft that cruised comfortably at speeds over 2,200 miles per hour. And unlike the U-2, the A-12 would rely on speed and signature reduction to evade detection. It was among the first aircraft to incorporate what we now call stealth technology, though that term didn't yet exist. The sharp angles of its design, the use of radar-absorbing materials, and the internal placement of weapons and sensors all contributed to its low radar profile. To test the aircraft, Groom Lake underwent another transformation. New hangars were built, larger, sturdier, and fully enclosed to prevent any visual sightings of the strange black shapes within. A special runway extension was paved to handle the A-12's needs, and the base's infrastructure was upgraded for everything from fuel storage to fire suppression. Everything about the A-12 was designed in silence. It was built in silence, and it flew in silence, at least to the public eye. The first A-12 flight took place on April 26, 1962, at Groom Lake. The test pilot, Louis Schulk, lifted the futuristic craft off the runway and into history. It was a brief hop, more of a controlled bounce than a proper flight, but it was the first breath of a machine that would push the boundaries of what was thought possible in the skies. As testing continued, the A-12 quickly revealed both its brilliance and its challenges. It could fly faster and higher than anything before it, but it was temperamental, expensive, and vulnerable in its own ways. Each flight was a carefully choreographed ballet of timing, precision, and sheer force of will. Maintenance between flights was extensive. The aircraft leaked fuel on the ground by design, since its tanks only sealed at altitude. Each mission carried risk, and there were tragic setbacks along the way, including fatal crashes. Yet despite these issues, the intelligence community was impressed. The A-12 could enter hostile airspace, capture photographs of extraordinary resolution, and be gone before enemy radars could lock on. It was the embodiment of Cold War ambition: faster, higher, better. But even before the A-12 could fully take root, its successor was already emerging from the shadows. The SR-71 Blackbird, perhaps the most famous spy plane ever built, was an evolution of the A-12. Developed jointly by Lockheed and the US Air Force, the SR-71 retained the speed, stealth, and altitude of the A-12, but added new systems for reconnaissance, crew survivability, and range. Unlike the A-12, which carried a single pilot and camera system, the SR-71 housed 2 crew members, a pilot and a reconnaissance systems officer. Together, they operated a suite of sensors, radar systems, and defensive countermeasures. Visually, the 2 aircraft looked similar, but they were distinct. The SR-71 was heavier, longer, and capable of flying over 3,000 miles without refueling. It featured a longer nose for improved aerodynamics, more advanced ECM, electronic countermeasures systems, and improved navigation capabilities. Its black skin, coated with special materials to manage heat and reduce radar signature, gave it its iconic appearance and its nickname, the Blackbird. From 1966 until its retirement in the 1990s, the SR-71 flew missions over global hotspots, from North Korea to Libya to the Middle East, without ever being shot down. Not once. It routinely cruised at speeds over Mach 3 and at altitudes above 85,000 feet, gathering intelligence with unmatched precision. When a surface-to-air missile was detected, the standard response was simple: accelerate. Nothing could catch it. Back at Groom Lake, test flights of both the A-12 and SR-71 pushed the boundaries of physics and engineering. Pilots trained in total secrecy. Maintenance crews worked in rotating shifts to support missions that sometimes began and ended under the cover of darkness. Specialized support vehicles, painted matte black to blend with the desert night, tracked each flight, while radar systems and telemetry stations kept eyes on the craft as it pierced the atmosphere. This chapter of Area 51's history, dominated by sleek black aircraft, supersonic flight, and state-sanctioned invisibility, cemented the base's reputation as the birthplace of advanced aerospace. But these projects were never spoken of publicly. Their existence was denied, their missions classified. Even the sound they made, an eerie, thunderous roar that sometimes echoed across the Nevada desert, was explained away as weather phenomena, sonic booms, or hallucinations. For decades, the A-12 and SR-71 remained hidden in plain sight, captured in blurry photographs, whispered about by aviation enthusiasts, but never officially acknowledged. Their very design gave rise to many of the first UFO sightings tied to Area 51. What else could move that fast, that high, that silently? The truth, as it turned out, was stranger and more impressive than fiction. These weren't alien crafts. They were products of human genius, built in silence and flown in the service of knowledge. Lockheed's Skunk Works had delivered not just one, but two of the most advanced aircraft in the history of flight. And they had done so under the cover of darkness, behind closed hangar doors, and across the endless skies of Nevada. This was the era of black projects, of aircraft that lived only in shadows, supported by teams who could never speak of their accomplishments, and protected by fences that marked a boundary not just of land, but of truth. It was innovation bound to secrecy, science bound to silence, and it all happened in a place that officially did not exist. Cold War shadows, surveillance programs, nuclear testing, and espionage defense. In the decades following World War II, the world found itself divided, not by oceans or geography, but by ideology. The Western Bloc, led by the United States, and the Eastern Bloc, dominated by the Soviet Union, entered a prolonged and deeply unsettling era known as the Cold War. Unlike traditional conflicts, the Cold War wasn't fought with tanks and trenches, but with secrecy, surveillance, and the slow, calculated movement of power beneath the surface of public life. Nowhere was the temperature of this invisible war measured more accurately than in the deserts of Nevada, where Area 51, a facility without public acknowledgement or presence on any civilian map, had become a crucible for innovation, a sanctuary for secrecy, and a silent witness to some of the most consequential projects of the modern era. By the early 1960s, Area 51 was more than just a testing ground for new aircraft. It had evolved into a nerve center for Cold War strategy. The focus was no longer limited to building faster planes. Now, the priority had become total information awareness. Knowing where the enemy was, what they were doing, what they were building, and how close they were to crossing the nuclear threshold. To understand this period, one must return to the terrifying context of the time. The world lived under the shadow of mutually assured destruction. Both superpowers had developed and deployed nuclear weapons capable of obliterating entire cities in minutes. A single miscalculation, a failed message, or a misunderstood signal could have triggered catastrophic consequences. In this atmosphere of looming annihilation, the stakes of even the smallest intelligence error were enormous. And so, the United States built a web of surveillance programs, many of which were so deeply classified that even today, portions remain redacted from public record. While some of these programs operated in space, via satellites launched into orbit, others remained earthbound, hidden in hangars, laboratories, and data bunkers, many of which were connected in some way to the broader mission of Area 51. One such surveillance program was Senior Bowl, a code name for a high-altitude drone reconnaissance system developed in response to increasing risks associated with manned overflights. It was followed by Tagboard, which aimed to develop unmanned supersonic reconnaissance drones, the precursors to today's autonomous aerial surveillance. These experimental drones, launched from modified bombers and guided by advanced radar and telemetry, were tested in secret over restricted corridors near Groom Lake. Few succeeded, many failed. But every test taught engineers something new. Some programs were even more exotic. Quartz and Have Blue, were early conceptual studies into stealth systems and radar-deflecting shapes, years before the famous F-117 stealth fighter would become publicly known. Engineers pored over heat signatures, electromagnetic profiles, and surface reflections, conducting experiments designed to reduce the very presence of an object in the sky. Some of these studies took place in underground facilities or in remote annexes of Groom Lake, where sophisticated sensors and radar ranges had been set up to test reflection angles and infrared invisibility. But while the skies above Area 51 were filled with test flights and prototypes, the ground below held its own secrets, many of them tied not to aircraft, but to nuclear weapons. Just a short distance away from Groom Lake lies the Nevada Test Site, a sprawling complex where the U.S. Department of Energy conducted over 9 nuclear detonations between 1951 and 1992. Though technically separate from Area 51, the test site's proximity and the heavy overlap in security, logistics, and scientific personnel meant that the two locations were often functionally intertwined. From the sky, the Nevada test site looks like a desolate checkerboard of craters and scars, each one the legacy of a violent explosion. These were not just tests of bombs, but simulations of war itself. Scientists studied the effects of radiation on buildings, vehicles, communication equipment, and even human mannequins arranged in eerily lifelike poses. Entire fake towns were constructed, complete with houses, schools, and power lines, only to be vaporized in the blink of an eye. The data collected was used not only to refine nuclear weapon designs, but to better understand blast patterns, fallout behavior, and survivability in the event of a real-world nuclear exchange. While the public was vaguely aware that nuclear tests were taking place somewhere in the desert, the scale, precision, and frequency of these events were heavily classified. Even the shockwaves, felt as tremors hundreds of miles away, were often dismissed by officials as routine seismic activity. It was within this crucible of fire and fear that Area 51 carved out its enduring purpose. Engineers, scientists, and military officers collaborated in a tightly controlled web of operations that blended reconnaissance technology with nuclear deterrence strategy. Surveillance planes tested at Groom Lake were outfitted with special cameras capable of capturing nuclear silos from hundreds of miles away. Sensor pods were developed to measure radiation signatures, missile fuel trails, and heat sources. Radar installations were modified to detect low-level launches, cruise missile deployments, and troop movements across Eurasia. Defensive espionage was also a major concern. While the United States was focused on peering into the Soviet Union, there was a growing awareness that America itself was being watched. Soviet satellites, codenamed Cosmos, regularly passed over the western US, including Nevada. Area 51 personnel were briefed on the orbital schedules of these satellites and would suspend visible testing activities during satellite flyovers. Aircraft were moved under shelters, runways cleared, lights shut off. Occasionally, false setups were staged, decoys to mislead foreign analysts watching from above. In time, this careful cat-and-mouse game became second nature. Area 51 was not merely a place where technology was tested. It was a place where observation itself became an art form. Every action was calculated, every movement tracked. The facility became a mirror of the world it was trying to observe, layered, coded, and compartmentalized. It was also a time when the very concept of secrecy became institutionalized. Employees underwent polygraph tests. Clearance levels were strictly enforced, often using need-to-know hierarchies so that no one individual ever knew too much. Disinformation was not just a defensive tactic. It became an active part of strategy. Projects were given misleading names, obscure budgets, and complex code names. Misinformation was sometimes deliberately leaked to mask the true nature of a program. The base itself expanded, though never officially. Satellite dishes appeared near the ridgelines. New towers rose, surrounded by fences and cameras. Sensors were buried beneath the sand, tuned to detect vibration, movement, and even heat signatures. Rumors circulated of underground bunkers, hidden elevator shafts, and subterranean laboratories where classified materials were stored and studied. Whether these rumors were true or part of an elaborate security protocol was never confirmed. And that, perhaps, was the point. Beyond surveillance and testing, Area 51 played a quiet but pivotal role in training. Certain elite units of the US Air Force and intelligence community were brought to the facility to simulate encounters with Soviet equipment, using mock-ups, flight simulators, and actual captured hardware. Through clandestine means, the US had obtained examples of Soviet MiG fighters, which were flown and studied under controlled conditions. These operations allowed American pilots to understand the strengths and weaknesses of potential adversaries before ever encountering them in real combat. This blending of espionage, engineering, and psychology became a trademark of Cold War defense. It was not just about building tools, it was about understanding the mindset of the opponent. What were they afraid of? What were they capable of? What could be learned without ever firing a shot? As the Cold War deepened through the 1970s and 1980s, new threats emerged. Mobile missile launchers, submarine-based deterrents, chemical and biological weapons. In response, the surveillance technologies pioneered at Groom Lake adapted. Airborne platforms were developed to carry infrared sensors, side-looking radar, electronic warfare packages, and communications intercept systems. Some were based on traditional aircraft, heavily modified. Others were unconventional, drones, balloons, even proposals for high-altitude airships that could loiter quietly above foreign territory. Though much of this era's innovation has yet to be fully declassified, enough is known to understand the scale and scope of what was attempted. The Cold War's quiet arms race was not just about building weapons, but about building eyes, ears, and minds that could anticipate conflict before it ignited. Area 51, surrounded by nothing but sand and silence, had become one of the most valuable pieces on the global chessboard. Every test flight, every image captured, every radar return studied in those dim-lit bunkers helped the United States maintain the strategic balance. And the men and women who worked there, most of whom could never speak of their roles, were guardians not just of secrets, but of peace through vigilance. In hindsight, the most remarkable aspect of this period wasn't the technology itself, but the sheer coordination of secrecy at a national scale. Decades passed, with almost no official acknowledgement of the base's existence, its location, its purpose, its daily operations. None of it appeared in government records, news reports, or public statements. The silence was so complete, so absolute, that Area 51 became more than a place. It became a symbol of what could be hidden, a symbol of what might be happening out of sight, a symbol of control, of knowledge, of narrative, and of the boundary between public reality and private truth. And through all of it, the Cold War continued. Above ground, world leaders shook hands at summits. Underground, weapons were buried, strategies planned. In the air, surveillance planes drew invisible lines across hostile skies. And at Groom Lake, the shadows remained, deep, deliberate, and patient, waiting for the next mission, the next threat, the next step in a war that was never declared, but never truly at rest. Entering the restricted zone, how Area 51 became legally sealed off, including the camo dudes. By the 1980s, Area 51 had already been the site of some of the most advanced aviation testing in history. It had seen the birth of spy planes that flew higher than clouds, drones that whispered across the stratosphere, and experimental technologies whose full details remain sealed in vaults even today. But for all the innovation happening within its chain-linked borders, what made Area 51 increasingly unique was not just what was inside. It was how fiercely and systematically the outside world was kept away. The need for secrecy had always been part of the base's DNA. From the very beginning, workers had operated under strict non-disclosure agreements. Flights were hidden from civilian radar. Photographs were forbidden. But in time, secrecy alone was no longer enough. As aviation technology pushed the limits of physics and the Cold War stoked public curiosity, the base had to go further, transforming from a classified test facility into something that more closely resembled a sealed territory. That transition began with geography. Groom Lake, the dry salt bed at the center of the facility, had long been surrounded by natural barriers. Ridgelines, harsh desert terrain, and miles of nothing. But in the age of zoom lenses, long-range surveillance, and satellite photography, distance was no longer protection. The government knew it needed not just isolation, but legal insulation. The problem was a small set of publicly accessible vantage points located in the hills and mountains just outside the restricted base boundaries. While the base itself sat within a secured military zone, certain high-elevation spots, like Freedom Ridge and Whiteside's Peak, offered distant views into Groom Lake, especially when equipped with telescopes or high-powered cameras. These remote observation points were harmless to the casual hiker, but to the increasingly curious public, they became pilgrimage sites. Journalists, conspiracy theorists, and aircraft enthusiasts began trekking to these ridges, often camping out for days just to catch a glimpse of something strange in the night sky. A flicker, a shape, a sound. In some cases, they succeeded. The long lens of a camera might catch the edge of a hangar door, the blurry silhouette of an aircraft, or the twin plumes of an engine burning through the dark. These were fleeting images, often indistinct, but they were enough to worry the government. At first, the military responded with heightened patrols and signage. Warning placards were posted along the base's edge, often worded with cold precision. Warning, military installation, use of deadly force authorized. But even that wasn't enough. In the early 1990s, after years of growing civilian interest and mounting evidence that photographs were being captured from public land, the US Air Force moved to take more permanent action. They filed an official land withdrawal request with the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, asking to annex approximately 4,000 additional acres of public land around Groom Lake, land that included the now famous Freedom Ridge and Whiteside's Peak. The request was based on national security, citing that public access to these ridges compromised operations at the base. While the justification was vague, the message was clear. The era of open desert was ending. The walls were about to grow higher, even if they remained invisible. Local residents and civil liberties advocates protested. Lawsuits were filed. Journalists questioned the legality of removing public land without full transparency. But in 1995, the land grab was approved. The US government officially closed off the remaining key observation points around Area 51, pushing the boundary further outward and eliminating the last places where civilians could view the facility. And just like that, Groom Lake disappeared again, this time from the ground. To enforce this newly expanded perimeter, the government deployed not just fences or cameras, but something far more human, a highly discreet and heavily armed private security force. These men, operating in unmarked vehicles, dressed in military-style camouflage, and carried high-powered binoculars and night vision gear. To the growing online community of Area 51 watchers, they quickly earned a nickname, the Camo Dudes. Unlike traditional military police or public law enforcement, the Camo Dudes did not wear insignias. They carried no visible rank, offered no names, and never crossed the invisible line that marked the boundary between public land and government-controlled space. They operated from the shadows, parked on hillsides, perched behind rocks, or cruising silently in white pickups with tinted windows and antenna arrays. They watched, but rarely spoke. They followed, but rarely chased. Their presence was not overtly aggressive, but it was unmistakably intimidating. If you were near the restricted zone, Even if still on legal public land, they might appear within minutes. Sometimes you wouldn't see them at all until they pulled up behind your vehicle and just sat there, watching. Some who wandered too close to the perimeter, knowingly or unknowingly, reported being stopped, photographed, or questioned. Others claimed they were warned over loudspeakers or flashlights at night. And in rare cases, if someone stepped just a few feet across the boundary, they were detained and handed over to Lincoln County Sheriff's deputies for processing. The most remarkable thing about these encounters was not what was said, but what wasn't. The camo dudes were under strict orders never to engage in unnecessary conversation. They didn't explain their role. They didn't confirm the location's name. They didn't even confirm they existed. If asked who they worked for, they would often say nothing. If pressed further, they might say something like, "We're with security," or simply, "You need to leave." It was a kind of psychological warfare, minimal, controlled, and incredibly effective. Visitors quickly learned that while the desert seemed empty, they were never alone. Even more unsettling was the fact that, technically, no law had been broken in most cases. Many of those monitored by camo dudes remained on public land, never stepping over the restricted border. But the proximity alone was enough to draw a response. This raised deeper questions about how far the government was willing to go to protect something it refused to admit existed. And then there was the technology. Though the camo dudes themselves were often visible, they were only the tip of a much larger surveillance system. Hidden motion detectors were rumored to be buried under access roads and hiking trails, some supposedly able to detect the unique heat signature of a human body, or the rumble of a car engine. Infrared cameras were thought to line the hillsides. Drones and observation towers watched from distances too great to see with the naked eye. Some who frequented the area claimed they could hear low-frequency hums, subsonic drones perhaps. Others said they witnessed vehicles appear on back roads in places where there were no tire tracks just minutes before. Stories began to circulate of being tracked all the way back to nearby towns like Rachel or Alamo, watched not just in the desert, but at diners, motels, and gas stations. What was clear, though never officially acknowledged, was that the perimeter of Area 51 had become more than a fence. It was a psychological boundary, wrapped in mystery and surveillance, reinforced not with walls, but with presence. It wasn't just about stopping intrusions. It was about dissuading the thought of intrusion in the first place. The perimeter fence itself remained deceptively simple. A dusty wire fence with nondescript warning signs stretching across the rocky terrain. No floodlights, no barbed wire, no towers, and yet few dared cross it. What added to the unease was the lack of consistency. The rules, when questioned, seemed to shift. Some visitors were approached immediately. Others were left alone for hours. Some were warned away gently, others harshly. This inconsistency made the boundary feel alive, capable of reacting, adapting, and deciding. In the broader cultural imagination, Area 51 had already become legendary. But with the legal sealing off of the land and the emergence of the camo dudes, it transformed from a place of secret flights into something far more mythic, a zone of forbidden knowledge, a place guarded not just by fences, but by silence, not just by men, but by the weight of implication. You didn't need to be told what would happen if you crossed the line. You just needed to see the man in the hill, watching through a scope. You just needed to feel the presence behind the window of a white pickup. You just needed to read the sign. No photography, no trespassing, deadly force authorized. And for most, that was enough. To this day, the restricted zone surrounding Area 51 remains one of the most legally secure pieces of land in the United States. Its boundaries continue to grow, not just physically, but conceptually. The camo dudes are still there, their tactics refined, their silence maintained. Even as technology has changed and interest in the base has surged with the internet age, the invisible line in the Nevada desert holds firm. It is a modern moat, guarding not a castle, but a question. What lies beyond that hill? What flies above that runway? And why, after all these years, does no one ever answer? Roswell and the birth of the alien theory. Before the whispers of Groom Lake, before camouflaged men patrolled desert ridges, and before black triangles cut silently through the sky, there was Roswell. Roswell, New Mexico, a small desert town surrounded by ranches, mesas, and long, empty roads. In the summer of 1947, it was as ordinary as any place in the post-war American Southwest. Life was slow. Radios played Glenn Miller. Families picnicked in the shade. And most people had never heard the word extraterrestrial, much less imagined one falling from the sky. But in July of that year, something strange happened. Something that would plant a seed, a small, flickering question that would grow into one of the most enduring and complex myths in modern history. It began on the vast stretch of land known as the Foster Ranch, about 75 miles northwest of Roswell. On the morning of July 3rd, a local rancher named Mac Brazel discovered a scattered field of debris after a stormy night. Shiny, metallic fragments littered the ground, unlike anything he had seen before. The pieces were lightweight, yet strangely rigid. Some were paper-thin, others bore unusual symbols that Brazel couldn't identify. There were also thin rods, odd pieces of foil, and a material that appeared to resist cutting or burning. He collected some of it and drove into town, eventually contacting the local sheriff, who then alerted the nearby Roswell Army airfield. Within hours, military personnel arrived at the site, took control of the debris, and quickly cordoned off the area. The cleanup was swift. Brazel, along with others who had seen the wreckage, were interviewed by the army, and some were encouraged, perhaps even pressured, to say nothing more. On July 8, 1947, the US Army Air Forces issued a press release that would become infamous. It read, "The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday, when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office." The phrase, "flying disc," exploded across newspapers. Headlines screamed about a captured flying saucer. Radio hosts speculated. People panicked. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The very next day, the military issued a new statement, claiming that the debris recovered was nothing more than a weather balloon, part of a routine atmospheric research operation. They even brought forward debris that looked mundane: rubber, foil, balsa wood. Photographs were taken of military officers posing beside it, offering what appeared to be an open and shut explanation. And for a time, the public accepted it. The Roswell story slipped quietly into the background of post-war life. Most Americans were preoccupied with rationing, rebuilding, and the new anxieties of the nuclear age. Flying saucers made for entertaining fiction, but few considered them anything more. Yet the original mystery never truly faded. For decades, it lingered beneath the surface, a footnote in local memory, a half-whispered tale at gas stations or diners. Something about the speed of the retraction, the military's tight-lipped behavior, and the nature of the debris stuck in the minds of those who had seen it up close. The idea that something extraordinary had occurred and had been covered up never quite disappeared. But it wasn't until the late 1970s, more than 30 years after the event, that the Roswell incident re-emerged into the national spotlight. And when it did, it came back not as a curiosity, but as a revelation. In 1978, physicist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who had originally recovered and inspected the debris in 1947. Marcel told Friedman that, in his opinion, the material was not of this earth, that the official story of a weather balloon had been a fabrication, and that the truth had been buried under layers of military denial. This single interview cracked the story wide open. Over the next few years, a flood of new witnesses emerged. Some claimed to have seen the debris. Others said they had witnessed bodies, small humanoid forms allegedly recovered near the wreckage. A few even suggested that the military had transported these beings to various secret facilities for study and containment. The word alien had now entered the conversation. And as the years passed, Roswell transformed. No longer a footnote, it became a symbol, not just of a mysterious crash, but of the idea that the government was hiding something monumental from its own people. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, eyewitnesses were tracked down, stories catalogued, timelines pieced together. And while accounts varied, the core theme remained consistent. Roswell was not just an accident, it was an encounter. The government, for its part, stayed silent. Decades passed without any further clarification. This silence only added fuel to the fire. In the absence of concrete answers, speculation grew. The public began to ask broader questions. If an alien craft had crashed in 1947, where had it gone? What happened to the wreckage? To the supposed bodies? Were they kept somewhere? That question, that void, needed a home. And in time, it found one. Though Area 51 had nothing to do with the original Roswell incident, indeed, it didn't even exist as a facility at the time of the crash, it became, over the years, inextricably linked to the narrative. As secrecy around the base deepened, and as stories emerged of unidentified aircraft being tested at night, the public imagination began to connect the dots. What if the debris had been moved to Nevada? What if the weather balloon was a cover-up for reverse-engineered alien technology? What if the glowing lights in the sky weren't prototypes, but extraterrestrial craft taken from Roswell and reactivated in the desert? By the 1980s and 1990s, the narrative had fully merged. In documentaries, interviews, and even pop culture, Roswell became the origin point of modern alien mythology, and Area 51 became the secret chamber where that story played out behind locked doors. In truth, the Roswell incident had much more mundane origins. Later investigations, including a comprehensive report released by the US Air Force in 1994, confirmed that the debris recovered in 1947 was part of a highly classified project known as Project Mogul, an experimental program designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests by deploying high-altitude balloons equipped with sensitive listening devices. This explained both the unusual materials and the military's rapid reversal of its initial statement. The public had unknowingly stumbled upon a fragment of Cold War espionage, and the cover-up wasn't about aliens at all. It was about preventing the Soviets from realizing just how closely they were being monitored. But by the time this explanation was released, it no longer mattered. The myth had taken root, and no official statement could unseat it. In the decades since, Roswell has become a cultural phenomenon. The town now hosts an annual UFO festival, complete with parades, lectures, and alien-themed merchandise. Museums line the streets, tourists pose with statues of greys and flying saucers. What was once a forgotten ranching town has become the epicenter of extraterrestrial Americana. And yet, beneath the kitsch and spectacle, the original mystery remains strangely powerful. People still ask, what if? What if there was a cover-up? What if some of the witnesses were telling the truth? What if Roswell was the first crack in a door to a much larger truth? This legacy, the sense of a secret barely concealed, would come to define public fascination with Area 51 in the years to follow. Because if something strange could fall from the sky in 1947, and if that something could be hidden for decades, then perhaps, just perhaps, it had been taken somewhere, studied, stored, and maybe even duplicated. Roswell gave the myth its beginning, but Area 51 gave it its shadow. Together, they formed the foundation of modern UFO lore, an enduring blend of fact, fiction, fear, and curiosity. And somewhere, in the middle of the desert, behind a chain link fence and a sign that says, "Use of deadly force authorized." The story waits, unfinished, unproven, but never forgotten. Bob Lazar and the S4 claims, the controversial whistleblower who ignited modern UFO mythology. By the late 1980s, Area 51 was no longer an unknown speck on the map. It was a name whispered on late-night radio, discussed in hushed conversations among aviation enthusiasts, and increasingly circled by those seeking the truth behind unexplained lights in the sky. But even amid rumors of secret aircraft and black projects, the myth of Area 51 still clung closely to the realm of experimental aviation. The concept of aliens and extraterrestrial technology, though long gestating in the public imagination, had yet to fully fuse with the facility's legend. Then came Bob Lazar. In May 1989, a local Las Vegas news station aired a now famous interview. The segment was hosted by investigative journalist George Knapp and featured a shadowy figure using the pseudonym Dennis, silhouetted in darkness, voice distorted. The man claimed to have worked at a highly classified facility south of Area 51 at a site he referred to as S4. His claim was extraordinary. According to Dennis, his real name was Bob Lazar, and he had been employed by the US government to work on reverse engineering extraterrestrial spacecraft. Not just one, but 9 separate craft, each with its own unique characteristics, materials, and propulsion systems. The interview sent a shockwave through the UFO community, the military, and pop culture. Here, for the first time, was a man who claimed not just to witness alien technology, but to have been directly involved in its scientific analysis. Over the weeks and months that followed, Lazar stepped out of the shadows and into public view. With a calm, technical demeanor, he laid out a story that was, by his account, not based on belief, but on direct experience. His narrative was as follows. In 1988, Lazar claimed, he was recruited through a third-party defense contractor after submitting his resume and background to work in advanced propulsion. He said he had degrees in physics from MIT and engineering from Caltech, qualifications that, at the time, seemed to support his claim to high-level clearance. Once cleared, he said he was flown to Area 51, but then transported by bus, windows blacked out, to a nearby location built into the side of a mountain along Papoose Lake, a dry lakebed just south of Groom Lake. This facility, he said, was S4, a site so secret that it made Area 51 seem open by comparison. At S4, Lazar claimed, he was assigned to study the propulsion system of one of the craft, an assignment that involved dissecting the mechanics of a gravity-based engine, a technology he said was not made by human hands. According to him, the system operated not with combustion or thrust, but with gravity manipulation. Central to this, he said, was an unknown element, something he identified as Element 115. This element, Lazar explained, was stable in its exotic isotope form and was capable of generating an anti-gravity field when properly processed. The spacecraft did not fly in the traditional sense, he said, but folded space around itself, pulling its destination toward it rather than pushing itself forward. The design of the craft, he added, reflected this alien origin. The interior was minimalistic, with small chairs suited to beings of slight stature. The controls were seamless, lacking visible seams or rivets. The exterior had a metallic, liquid-like quality, and the craft's movement, when active, was silent, sudden, and erratic, often shifting direction instantly in ways that defied known aerodynamics. Lazar claimed he saw one of the craft in flight during a test. It lifted effortlessly off the ground, hovered, and then darted away, executing maneuvers that no human aircraft could perform. He also stated that the briefing documents he was given during his employment included information about the origin of the craft, allegedly recovered from Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system over 39 light-years away. Needless to say, these claims were met with a combination of astonishment, skepticism, and intense scrutiny. Supporters hailed Lazar as a brave whistleblower, someone risking his life and reputation to reveal a truth long hidden. Skeptics, on the other hand, quickly went to work dismantling his background. His academic records at MIT and Caltech could not be verified. His claimed employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he said he had worked with particle accelerators, was disputed, though some circumstantial evidence, including a phone book listing and a newspaper photo, suggested at least a loose affiliation. The debate around his credibility only deepened the mystery. If Lazar was lying, why? For fame? He seemed uncomfortable in the spotlight. If he were telling the truth, then how had he slipped through the most rigorous secrecy protocols in the world? Lazar himself admitted that he had violated confidentiality agreements. He said he began speaking out publicly to protect himself, that once he realized how closely he was being monitored and how potentially dangerous his knowledge was, he thought going public was the only way to stay safe. By bringing his story to light, he believed he was no longer a liability to be quietly silenced. Following his interview, he became a reluctant figurehead in the world of ufology. Documentaries followed, radio interviews, public appearances. Critics hammered away at inconsistencies, while believers pointed to the uncanny specificity of his claims, particularly his description of element 115, which at the time had not yet been synthesized in any lab. Years later, in 2003, a team of Russian scientists would successfully synthesize element 115, now called moscovium. Though the isotope produced was unstable and decayed in milliseconds, supporters of Lazar noted that his description had predated this discovery, and that he had claimed the exotic form used in the propulsion system was a stable isotope not yet known to science. Another part of Lazar's story that drew attention was his description of S4 itself. Using maps, satellite imagery, and geographical references, enthusiasts tried to identify the site he described. Though no conclusive evidence has ever been found of structures at Papoose Lake, the area remains off-limits, with no public roads, no flight paths, and no known development. The government has never confirmed the existence of any base there. What made Lazar's story so enduring wasn't just its content, it was its tone. He didn't behave like a classic conspiracist. He avoided speculation. He stuck to what he claimed he personally saw or read. He often answered questions with, "I don't know," rather than embellishing. And he expressed open skepticism toward other alien-related claims, focusing only on his direct experiences. Even decades later, his demeanor remained largely unchanged. In 2018, he was featured in a documentary titled Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, directed by Jeremy Corbell. In it, Lazar appeared visibly fatigued by the attention his story had generated. He reiterated that he had nothing to gain from coming forward, and that he would discourage others from taking the same path, given the cost to his life and privacy. Still, the interest in his claims has only grown. Podcasts, news specials, government hearings on unidentified aerial phenomena. Each new development in the world of UAPs seems to echo, in some small way, the narrative Lazar told back in 1989. Skeptics point out the many holes in his story: missing records, unverifiable credentials, inconsistencies in dates and timelines. But believers counter with a simple observation: that Lazar was the first to publicly link Area 51, Papoose Lake, Element 115, and reverse-engineered spacecraft in a single, coherent narrative, one that eerily mirrored future revelations in both black project aviation and scientific exploration. Even the US government's recent reclassification of certain UFO sightings, now termed UAPs, and the establishment of new offices to study unexplained aerial phenomena, have added weight to the broader conversation Lazar helped ignite. Regardless of whether one believes his story, there is no denying its impact. Bob Lazar did not just tell a tale. He shifted the cultural lens through which we view secrecy, space, and the possibilities of contact. He humanized the notion of hidden technology. He gave it names, dates, geography. He made the impossible feel structured, systematic, and just barely out of reach. And in doing so, he changed Area 51 forever. No longer was it just a place where strange aircraft were tested. After Lazar, it became the epicenter of alien mythology, a modern Mount Olympus where gods and machines, science and silence collided beneath the desert sun. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Bob Lazar brought a narrative out of the shadows, and once the world had heard it, it could never be unheard. Reverse engineering and alien tech, claims of recovered spacecraft and hidden technologies. There's a certain allure to the idea of found technology, not invented, not imagined, but discovered. The possibility that something not of this earth could fall into human hands, that hidden away in bunkers or hangars, covered in tarps and quietly dissected under fluorescent lights, lie the answers to questions we have not yet dared to fully ask. If there is a single concept that fuels the deepest currents of the Area 51 mythos, it is this, that the United States government, or perhaps a hidden branch of it, has in its possession advanced spacecraft, vehicles not built by human minds or human hands, and that for decades it has been working to understand, replicate, and weaponize what it found. This is the story of reverse engineering alien technology, a theory as tantalizing as it is controversial. The core of the idea is simple. A craft of non-terrestrial origin crashes or is recovered, whether in Roswell or some other undisclosed incident. The government retrieves the wreckage, perhaps even intact vessels. These are transported to secure, remote facilities, shielded from both the public and from most branches of the military itself. From there, teams of scientists, engineers, and intelligence operatives begin the long, secretive work of studying the materials, analyzing the propulsion systems, decoding the controls, and if possible, recreating what they find. These efforts are said to take place not just at Area 51, but within a complex network of sites collectively referred to as the Black World. This world, made up of Special Access Programs, SAPs, and Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, USAPs, operates beyond the view of Congress, the press, and often even the Pentagon. The budget is hidden, compartmentalization is absolute, and access is granted only to those with the highest possible clearances. It is within this murky world, according to believers, that reverse engineering extraterrestrial craft has become a long-term scientific pursuit. The claims are detailed. Some say the craft themselves are stored in underground hangars, partially buried within desert mesas, accessible only by elevator shafts or camouflaged doors carved into rock. Others describe vast hangar-like chambers, deep beneath the Nevada desert, with catwalks, cranes, and metal platforms built around floating saucers, allowing engineers to access their engines and control modules. These alleged spacecraft are often described as being built from materials unknown to current metallurgy, lightweight but incredibly strong, able to absorb or deflect radar, sometimes exhibiting behaviors like self-healing, or appearing biologically integrated with their systems. In some accounts, there are no visible seams or bolts, no wires, no rivets, just smooth surfaces, as if the entire structure was grown rather than assembled. There are even stories of propulsion systems that remain active under controlled power, hovering silently in laboratory conditions. Observers claim to have seen gravitational fields manipulated at will. Some accounts describe experiments where objects placed beneath the active craft became weightless or began to drift unnaturally, suggesting localized control over inertia. These are not small claims, and yet they persist, year after year, whispered by former military personnel, echoed in declassified fragments, and sometimes hinted at by officials who stop just short of confirmation. The phenomenon of reverse engineering, in the context of UFO lore, gained particular traction in the wake of Bob Lazar's testimony. But it didn't begin with him. As far back as the 1950s, rumors swirled of military retrieval teams dispatched to crash sites to secure and transport debris. These teams, sometimes referred to by code names like Blue Fly or Project Moondust, were said to operate under extreme secrecy, sometimes arriving within hours of an incident. One of the most persistent legends involves an alleged crash near Kingman, Arizona, in the early 1950s, where a craft was reportedly recovered mostly intact and moved to an undisclosed location in the southwest. Another story references a 1953 crash in Utah, with military retrieval and containment carried out under cover of night. Over the decades, the details of these stories shift, but the structure remains. A craft is found. It is secreted away, and somewhere in the heart of the desert, the unpacking of the universe begins. Supporters of the reverse engineering theory point to several key arguments. The sudden leap in technology. They note the exponential progress in human technology, particularly since the mid-20th century. Integrated circuits, fiber optics, lasers, stealth materials, quantum research. While correlation doesn't prove causation, they argue that some breakthroughs came too quickly, too seamlessly, suggesting influence or assistance from non-human sources. The secrecy infrastructure. The sheer scale of black budgets, unacknowledged programs, and restricted military zones, like Area 51 itself, demonstrates that something is being hidden, they argue. If not alien technology, then what? What could require such extreme secrecy over such long periods? Eyewitness accounts. Numerous individuals, from retired military officers to contractors and aviation technicians, have come forward over the years with statements that suggest direct knowledge or suspicion of non-terrestrial artifacts being studied. While anecdotal, these accounts often share eerily similar details. One of the more high-profile proponents of this view is Dr. Stephen Greer, who has compiled hundreds of interviews with military and intelligence personnel. Some of these individuals claim to have seen artifacts, propulsion systems, or biological entities that defy known science. Greer and others argue that these testimonies, taken together, present a compelling pattern, even if hard evidence remains elusive. But for every believer, there is a skeptic, and the skeptics raise important questions. If such technology had truly been recovered and studied for decades, why haven't we seen undeniable evidence of it in our everyday world? Why hasn't gravity manipulation revolutionized energy? Why haven't anti-gravity vehicles replaced planes and rockets? The answer, according to some insiders, is that the technology is not fully understood, and possibly never will be. It may operate on principles beyond current physics, requiring not just new tools, but a new paradigm. One doesn't hand a smartphone to a medieval blacksmith and expect him to replicate it. Likewise, they argue, humans may be dealing with systems that are simply too advanced to reverse engineer. Others suggest that progress has been made, but it's been withheld, either because of national security concerns, corporate secrecy, or fear of societal disruption. Releasing such technology, they argue, would destabilize entire industries, crash economies, and rewrite everything we thought we knew about energy, physics, and even religion. These debates are intense, but they also remain strangely calm, because at the heart of this theory isn't just the craft, it's the human desire to understand what lies beyond. We've always disassembled what we don't understand, from ancient tools unearthed in the sand to meteorites pulled from the ice. We have always asked the same questions. What is this? Where did it come from? How does it work? And can we use it? Reverse engineering is simply the latest version of this curiosity, amplified to a cosmic scale. Whether or not any of these claims are true, the idea continues to capture the imagination. Films, books, television, All have echoed it. In fictional labs beneath fictional bases, teams of scientists stare at glowing objects, sketch diagrams, run diagnostics, and always there is a moment of awe. The feeling that this thing, this technology, comes from somewhere else. Area 51, whether or not it hosts such secrets, remains the perfect backdrop for the myth. Its remoteness, its silence, its resistance to scrutiny all lend it power. And even if the truth lies elsewhere, or nowhere at all, the idea that we could be learning from something not of this earth is now deeply embedded in the public psyche. It is not just about aliens. It is about possibility. The possibility that we are not alone, that we have already encountered something else, and that, somewhere in a lab beneath the desert floor, humanity is trying to catch up. Element 115 and exotic propulsion, theoretical fuel sources, and Lazar's description of gravity drives. Among all the strange terms, coded names, and whispered legends in the world of UFO lore, there is one element that stands apart, both literal and symbolic. It is Element 115, a number, a mystery, a key, a claimed fuel source from beyond our understanding, central to one of the most daring and controversial stories ever told about extraterrestrial technology. Though introduced to the world by Bob Lazar in the late 1980s, Element 115 has since become a kind of mythological touchstone, at once scientific and speculative, grounded in physics but wrapped in the mist of secrets. It's more than just an isotope. It's a concept that bridges the gap between the known and the unknown, between human limitations and what may lie just ahead of our reach. In Lazar's account, first brought to public attention in 1989 and detailed across decades of interviews and testimony, Element 115 was not simply a rare metal or exotic compound. It was, he said, the central fuel source used by the gravity propulsion systems of the spacecraft he claimed to have studied at a facility known as S4, just south of Area 51. According to Lazar, the craft he was assigned to reverse engineer utilized a reactor system that converted Element 115 into energy, specifically into a form of gravity manipulation. This reactor, he said, did not combust fuel or emit waste like a jet or rocket engine. Instead, it created a gravitational field that could be shaped, amplified, and directed. In his words, the system folded space in front of the craft, pulling the destination toward the vehicle instead of pushing the vehicle through space. This was not science fiction. It was, in his description, science far beyond our own. To understand what makes this claim so compelling and controversial, we have to look first at what Element 115 actually is. On the periodic table, Element 115 occupies a space between known elements, specifically between bismuth, 83, and livermorium, 116. For decades, it was purely theoretical. Scientists had long predicted that an element with 115 protons could exist. But such high atomic numbers fall into a category known as the super-heavy elements. These elements are not found in nature, and creating them in a lab requires advanced particle accelerators and extremely precise collisions of atomic nuclei. In 2003, a Russian-American team successfully synthesized an atom of element 115 for the first time. It was eventually named Moscovium, in honor of the Moscow-based lab that helped create it. However, the version produced was highly unstable, decaying in milliseconds. It was radioactive, short-lived, and offered no obvious exotic properties. Skeptics pounced. They argued that Lazar's claims had been debunked, but supporters pushed back. Lazar had never said any version of element 115 would be stable, only that the particular isotope used in the spacecraft reactor was stable under specific conditions. In his view, the element's properties depended entirely on its isotopic configuration, specifically the number of neutrons it contained. This opened the door to a provocative possibility. What if a stable isotope of element 115 does exist, but only outside of Earth? It's a question that veers into deep, speculative physics, particularly into a concept known as the island of stability. This is a hypothesized region of the periodic table where certain super-heavy elements could, under the right conditions, form stable nuclei that resist rapid decay. In theory, this could lead to the creation of materials with extraordinary properties, including new states of matter, superconductivity, and even manipulable gravitational effects. Lazar's claims suggested that the craft's propulsion system used element 115 not just for energy, but for gravity amplification. According to him, the reactor bombarded the element with protons, triggering a nuclear transmutation process that produced antimatter, which then reacted with another material to generate enormous energy. But more intriguingly, this reaction simultaneously produced a gravitational wave, a distortion of space-time itself. The gravity created wasn't a passive effect, like the Earth's mass pulling objects down. It was a controlled, directional field, a kind of artificial gravity well that could be bent and shaped around the craft. 3 emitters, mounted beneath the craft, focused these fields. By manipulating the shape of the field, the vehicle could lift, hover, accelerate, or change direction instantaneously. The most astounding part of this system, according to Lazar, was that it allowed for inertial dampening. The gravitational field not only moved the craft, it enveloped it so that the internal environment remained unaffected by acceleration. A 90-degree turn at 5,000 miles per hour would not jolt passengers or equipment. Inside the bubble of the gravity field, time and inertia behaved differently. From the outside, such a craft would appear to move without propulsion, to hover silently, then dart off in a straight line or vanish entirely from view. It would generate no heat signature, no sonic boom, no thrust trail. Its behavior would appear to violate the laws of motion as we know them. Sound familiar? These are the exact descriptions given in countless UFO sightings, from military pilots to civilians. Objects that accelerate instantly, vehicles that hang motionless, then zip away at impossible speeds, aircraft that defy the aerodynamic limits of wings, jets, or rotors. For those who believe Lazar's account, these sightings are observations of the same technology, gravity-based propulsion powered by element 115 in action. What makes this claim even more fascinating is that modern physics doesn't rule it out entirely. Our understanding of gravity remains deeply incomplete. Despite being one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe, gravity is the weakest and the least understood. General relativity describes how massive objects bend space and time, but unifying gravity with quantum mechanics remains one of the great unsolved puzzles in science. Some physicists theorize that gravity may originate from dimensions beyond the 4 we perceive: length, width, height, and time. If gravity is a leaking force from a higher dimension, then manipulating it would require technologies that interact with those dimensions. In such models, exotic materials like stable element 115 could, hypothetically, act as bridges or resonators, coupling our spacetime with external fields. Lazar never used such language. He wasn't a physicist by training, at least not on paper. But his descriptions resonate uncannily with later theoretical concepts. The idea of space-time warping, of propulsion through gravity distortion, of massless travel, are now part of mainstream theoretical physics, even if still far from realization. Despite this, Lazar never claimed that he understood the full workings of the reactor. His job, he said, was limited, studying a small portion of the system under strict compartmentalization. Each team worked on only one part of the craft, with minimal knowledge of the others. It was a need-to-know operation. And what he did know, he claimed, was enough to understand that this was not human technology. Over the years, element 115 has become more than a speculative isotope. It's become a symbol, a shorthand for everything hidden, everything advanced, everything just beyond reach. For some, it's the holy grail of propulsion. For others, it's a red herring, a pseudo-scientific distraction. But for millions, it remains a source of fascination. Even its name, Element 115, feels mysterious, scientific, yet incomplete. Just a number. No poetry, no mythological reference, no terrestrial grounding. It occupies a space between the real and the imagined. Some believe the US government has acquired significant quantities of stable 115 through non-terrestrial retrieval, crash sites, trade agreements, or ancient recoveries. Others believe it is not stored at Area 51 at all, but at a more secure, even more secretive location, somewhere deep within the global military-industrial complex, known only to a select few. Wherever it is, or isn't, Element 115 continues to serve as a theoretical doorway, a doorway to new energy, to new propulsion, to new ways of understanding the universe, or perhaps to new kinds of beings who already do. As we look up into the stars, wondering who or what else might be out there, Element 115 lingers in the mind, an echo of what might already be here, unseen, unstudied, or perhaps already understood. The Phoenix Lights and related sightings, major UFO sightings, tied to alleged experimental aircraft. There are moments in history when the strange becomes undeniable, when thousands of people look to the sky and what they see is not a flicker, a blur, or a distant light, but something massive, silent, and real. Among the many incidents that have woven themselves into the UFO tapestry, few have left a mark as lasting, as public, or as widely witnessed as the Phoenix Lights. It began in the early evening hours of March 13, 1997, over the quiet desert skies of Arizona. What unfolded that night, across hundreds of miles, seen by thousands of people, would become one of the most thoroughly documented and hotly debated UFO sightings in modern history. It wasn't just the magnitude of the sighting, it was how many people saw it. It was how long it lasted, and it was how deeply it defied explanation. The first reports came in around 7:30 p.m. from Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. Witnesses described a V-shaped formation of lights, 5 or more, moving slowly and silently across the sky. It didn't blink, it didn't roar, it didn't follow any recognizable flight path. The formation was wide, extremely wide, and unlike anything seen in the area before. As the object moved southeast across Arizona, more reports flooded in from Kingman, Prescott, Dewey, and eventually Phoenix. Witnesses were consistent in their descriptions. A massive, low-flying craft, triangular or boomerang-shaped, sometimes described as spanning the length of multiple football fields. Some said it blocked out the stars as it passed overhead. Others said they could see the underbelly, dark, matte, silent. It moved slowly, eerily slowly, not darting or flashing like a meteor or military jet, just gliding, steady, deliberate, and impossibly quiet. By the time it reached Phoenix, around 8:30 p.m., thousands of people were watching. Drivers pulled over on highways. Families stood in their backyards. Amateur videographers scrambled for their camcorders. The local police fielded dozens of 911 calls. Even the Arizona governor at the time, Fife Symington, would later admit that he had seen the object with his own eyes, and that it was not anything conventional. The event was so widespread, so public, that it forced the national media to pay attention. Local stations aired eyewitness interviews. CNN ran coverage. Talk shows debated theories. And quickly, 2 competing narratives emerged. The first, the official explanation, was that the lights seen around 10 p.m., which were filmed and widely circulated, were part of a military flare drop conducted by the Maryland Air National Guard over the Barry M. Goldwater Range. Flares, they said, suspended by parachutes, had drifted across the desert sky, creating the illusion of a hovering craft. They burned for a few minutes, then vanished. But this explanation only addressed the later lights. and not the original sightings of the massive V-shaped craft earlier in the evening, which had traveled across hundreds of miles. Eyewitnesses were quick to point out the differences. The object they saw was solid, structured, and moved with intention. Flares don't glide silently over populated areas for extended periods. They don't fly in tight, coordinated formation. And they don't block out stars. To this day, the Phoenix Lights remain officially unexplained, despite the government's efforts to frame them as mundane. For believers in experimental aircraft, black projects, or extraterrestrial surveillance, this event was more than just an anomaly. It was a revelation, and perhaps a slip. The theory, put forth by many in the UFO research community, is that the craft seen over Phoenix was either a classified military vehicle, operating out of bases like Area 51, or something not of human origin at all. Among the more grounded theories is that it was part of a secret program, a next-generation surveillance platform, perhaps a massive, low-speed, stealth blimp using advanced propulsion systems. Some suggest it was a craft known as the TR-3B, an alleged black triangle vehicle that has been whispered about in defense circles since the 1990s. According to this theory, the TR-3B is a nuclear-powered airship, a vast triangle fitted with a circular gravity-reducing propulsion system at its core. It's said to use electromagnetic fields to counteract gravity, allowing it to float silently and with great stability. The lights seen at each corner of the triangle, as described by Phoenix witnesses, would align with the vehicle's thrusters or navigation beacons. This idea ties directly back to Area 51 and similar test sites. Black triangle sightings have long been clustered around regions associated with military aerospace testing, not just in Nevada, but in California, Utah, and New Mexico. These sightings share common elements: massive size, triangular shape, silent operation, and sometimes an uncanny ability to hover or move vertically without apparent thrust. But even the TR-3B theory has limits. The sheer scale of the Phoenix Lights craft and its utter silence stretch the boundaries of what many believe even advanced black projects are capable of. For those who lean toward extraterrestrial explanations, the Phoenix Lights event was a low-altitude flyover, a deliberate, perhaps even peaceful display meant to be seen, not hidden. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a test, it was a statement, and it wasn't the only one. Throughout the late 20th century and into the 2000s, numerous mass sightings occurred across the globe, sharing eerie similarities, sightings that, like Phoenix, were clear, widespread, and resistant to simple explanations. In Belgium, between 1989 and 1990, an entire wave of black triangle sightings swept the country. Over 13,000 people reported seeing large triangular crafts with bright lights at each corner, gliding silently through the sky. In one instance, Belgian Air Force F-16s were scrambled to intercept one of the objects. Their radar systems locked on, only to watch the object outmaneuver and disappear with movements impossible for any known aircraft. In Stephenville, Texas, in 2008, dozens of witnesses, including local police, reported an enormous, silent craft with bright lights flying low over town. The object was tracked on radar, and FAA data confirmed anomalous aerial activity in the area. Like Phoenix, the sighting occurred near military training airspace. But again, no official explanation was ever given. Even in the UK, the so-called Rendlesham Forest incident of 1980 involved US Air Force personnel stationed at RAF Bentwaters, witnessing strange lights descending into the forest. What followed was a series of bizarre encounters, physical trace evidence, and recorded audio testimony that remains among the most compelling in military UFO history. Each of these incidents, while geographically and temporally distant, share a visual signature: large, silent craft, triangular or boomerang-shaped, bright lights at the corners, sudden or impossible acceleration, and the overwhelming sense that something intelligent and far advanced is operating beyond our understanding. Critics, of course, argue that these sightings are misinterpretations, aircraft flying in formation, flares, balloons, atmospheric phenomena. But when tens of thousands of people witness the same event in multiple locations, from different angles, when radar confirms presence, and when even government officials admit confusion, the question must be asked: what exactly is being tested or observed in our skies? In the case of the Phoenix Lights, the scale of the event changed the conversation. It wasn't a lone pilot or grainy photo. It was an entire city, a region, watching the sky go dark as something massive drifted overhead. Something without noise, without explanation, without response. And it never returned. At least, not openly. But in the years that followed, sightings continued. Quietly, occasionally. Patterns emerged. Triangles. Lights. Silence. Always hovering just at the edge of what could be proven. Always just out of reach. And so the mystery deepens. Were these advanced experimental aircraft, prototypes flown from secret facilities like Area 51, or were they something else entirely, a technology or intelligence, watching us the way we might watch a firefly behind glass? Whatever they were, the Phoenix Lights remain a turning point. The moment when the sky opened, and for a few minutes, thousands of people saw something that didn't belong to any country, any program, or any explanation we've been given. Something vast, something silent, and something that, to this day, has never been explained. Area 51 in pop culture. How film, TV, and games made Area 51 legendary. There's something strange that happens when a secret becomes too big to hide. It doesn't just vanish. It evolves. It changes shape. It slips out of the shadows and into the realm of story, fiction, memory, and myth. It becomes something people talk about, dream about, write about. And when it comes to Area 51, that transformation wasn't just inevitable. It was cinematic. For years, the base had no name, no address, no acknowledgement from the government. It didn't appear on maps. It wasn't mentioned in official documents. And yet, somehow, it managed to become one of the most recognizable places on Earth. Not because we were told what it was, but because we imagined what it could be. Through films and television shows, through novels, cartoons, video games, comic books, and midnight radio broadcasts, Area 51 grew into something larger than its physical footprint, larger than its hangars, or its runways, or its fences. It became an idea, a character, a symbol of all that is hidden, protected, and just barely out of reach. It started slowly, as most myths do. In the early years, during the 1950s and 60s, America was already steeped in Cold War tension. Spy satellites orbited the Earth, nuclear tests shook the desert floor, and the public's imagination drifted toward the stars. Science fiction movies lit up drive-in theaters across the country, casting alien shadows onto windshields and popcorn boxes. Strange sources, secret labs, silent observers from beyond the sky. None of them named Area 51 directly, but the shape of it was there, forming quietly in the background. Somewhere out there, hidden deep in the American desert, was a place where strange things happened, where the government kept its most delicate truths, a place not spoken of, but always suspected. By the time the 1980s arrived, stories had begun to gather around the base like dust on the wind. People whispered about the lights in the sky, about technology too advanced to be human, about beings, maybe, not from here. And then came the storytellers. In 1993, a television show debuted that would change everything. It was called The X-Files, and for the first time, Area 51 wasn't just a shadow, it was a setting, a real, fictional place, a symbol of everything Agent Mulder believed in, and everything Agent Scully tried to disprove. Government cover-ups, alien conspiracies, secret facilities hidden beneath layers of silence. Millions of viewers tuned in, week after week, to catch a glimpse of what might lie behind the chain-link fence. And that was only the beginning. In the summer of 1996, Area 51 moved from the small screen to the biggest stage of all, Hollywood blockbusters. The film Independence Day exploded onto the scene with flying saucers, iconic landmarks in ruins, and a president who, in a moment of cinematic drama, is taken to a facility hidden beneath the Nevada desert. A facility the government had always denied. A facility called Area 51. In the film, beneath the sand and steel, sits an alien ship, intact, silent, studied for decades. The idea was outrageous, and yet, somehow, it didn't feel that far-fetched. It felt familiar. It felt like a confirmation of everything the public had been whispering about for years. Independence Day wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural moment. It gave Area 51 a face, a sound, a location. It turned myth into memory, and it left the world wondering, what if? Soon after, the desert filled with tourists. People drove out to the edges of the restricted zone. They bought alien keychains from roadside stands. They took photos next to signs warning of deadly force. A small town called Rachel became a hub of extraterrestrial curiosity. A highway was renamed the Extraterrestrial Highway. The base, still officially denied by the government, had become a tourist attraction for something no one was supposed to talk about. And then, as technology advanced, the stories went interactive. Video games picked up where film left off. In arcades, players grabbed plastic rifles and fought their way through alien containment zones in a game called Area 51. On home consoles, they infiltrated shadowy bunkers, unraveled conspiracies, and stood face to face with secrets buried beneath desert sand. In virtual worlds, Area 51 wasn't a distant curiosity anymore. It was somewhere you could go, somewhere you could explore. Games like Deus Ex, Call of Duty, and Grand Theft Auto featured bases modeled after the real site, sometimes serious, sometimes satirical, always tapping into the same feeling that just beneath the surface, beneath the official story, was something extraordinary, something forbidden, something meant to stay hidden. And then came the memes. In 2019, a single joke on social media spread like wildfire. Storm Area 51, they can't stop all of us. It was meant to be funny, a light-hearted rebellion against secrecy, but it caught fire, fueled by curiosity and absurdity, and the lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find out what was behind the fence. Millions responded. Videos were made, events were planned. The military issued warnings, and for a moment, it felt like the world was looking, together, into the same shadow. In the end, only a few hundred people actually showed up. There was no storming of gates, no alien rescues, no last-minute confessions from the government. But something else happened. Something quiet, something honest. People camped together under the stars. They shared stories. They talked about what might be out there. They laughed. They speculated. And they stared into the desert night, wondering. Because at its core, Area 51 isn't just about aliens or aircraft or secrecy. It's about imagination. It's about the part of us that still believes there are things we don't understand, things worth protecting or fearing or finding. It's about the tension between truth and silence, between skepticism and belief. It's the modern myth we've all agreed to participate in. Not just a base, but a boundary. A stage where every theory, every rumor, every hope is projected onto the sand. In books and films, in games and jokes, Area 51 has grown beyond its fences. It lives now in our stories, in every scene where the government knows more than it says, in every line of dialogue where someone says, "You weren't cleared for that information," in every grainy image of lights moving silently across the sky. It's not just a place anymore. It's a language. It's the place we go, in our minds, when we wonder what secrets lie just out of view. It's the story we return to, again and again, because it never quite finishes. And perhaps that's the point. Area 51 has become legendary, not because we know what's inside, but because we don't. And maybe because we never will. Inside the green room, alleged levels, underground tunnels, and deep secrets. There's something unsettling about the idea of an elevator that doesn't have a top floor, or a bottom one. Something about descending into the earth, not knowing how far down it goes, only that each floor is deeper, darker, more restricted than the one above. That's the image that lingers in many of the stories told about Area 51. Not the runways or the aircraft, not the watchtowers or the desert heat, but what lies beneath. Stories of hidden elevators disguised as office closets, of badge-only access to levels that don't exist on any blueprint, of tunnels that stretch for miles, linking buildings and hangars, branching off into silence, always deeper, always colder. The term some use for this hidden world is the green room, not in the theatrical sense, not a place where actors wait before a performance, but as a code. A name given to a space that may or may not exist. A place that, if it does, is said to house the real heart of Area 51. The part no one talks about. The part few have ever seen. According to various leaked accounts and whispered testimonies, the above-ground section of the base is merely a shell. An administrative front, a decoy, a necessary illusion. The real work, the real secrets, are kept below ground, in a layered structure buried beneath the Groom Lake Basin, accessed through disguised elevators, blast-proof stairwells, and restricted access shafts. The subterranean levels are said to descend far beyond what would be typical for a military installation. Some claim the underground complex consists of 7 main levels, each dedicated to a different function: research, engineering, containment, surveillance, energy, communication, and below them all, something else. Something sealed, something referred to only as Level 7. Others say there are more than 7, that the base expands outward as much as it does downward, that once you go far enough, you're no longer beneath Area 51, but beneath other parts of Nevada entirely. That high-speed underground transport tubes connect Groom Lake to other secret sites across the Southwest. White Sands, Los Alamos, Edwards, Dulce, forming a network of subterranean arteries pulsing beneath the desert floor. There is no proof of any of this. No photographs, no blueprints, no former employees with keycards dangling from their necks. Just stories, accounts given anonymously, off the record, sometimes shared in the final years of someone's life, when secrets begin to feel heavier than loyalty. One such story, often retold, involves a technician who claimed to have been flown into the base for a 3-month contract. Upon arrival, he was taken underground, blindfolded during the elevator descent, given access to only one corridor, one lab, and one purpose. He said the facility was windowless, always cold, with ceilings just low enough to feel off. The walls were sterile, the air tasted filtered, and no one, not once, made eye contact in the hallways. Everyone moved with the silence of people who had been told too much, or maybe not enough. He spoke of doors without handles, rooms without sound, of walking past observation windows where the lights were kept off, where you could just barely make out the shape of something inside, breathing. He left the base after 3 months. He was never called back, and for years he said nothing. Until one day, sitting in his garage, he began to draw what he remembered. Not the machines, not the corridors, just the elevators, the buttons, 1 through 6, and a blank one, slightly lower than the rest, marked not with a number, but a symbol, a triangle, point down. Other stories mention circular rooms with walls that rotate. Rooms you enter through one door and exit through another, never passing the same way twice. Soundproof corridors with rubber flooring, airlocks that hiss even when no one's using them. Emergency protocols that require everyone on a level to face the wall when a certain tone is played over the intercom. And always, beneath the technical detail, there's the same feeling: isolation. A sense that these underground levels aren't just secret, they are disconnected. Emotionally, psychologically. Separated from the world above, not just by steel and soil, but by purpose. Some say this underground structure was built during the Cold War, using the same tunneling equipment developed for nuclear missile silos and deep earth shelters. Others believe it predates the Cold War entirely, that a natural cave system beneath the Groom Range was expanded over time, turned into something artificial, controlled, fortified. A few, venturing into more esoteric territory, claim the underground levels were built downward until they encountered something else. That construction teams were halted not by technical limits, but by what they found beneath. A buried craft, a chamber, a structure not of human origin. Whether you take that as literal truth or metaphor, the symbolism of it is hard to ignore. That beneath the secrets we bury, there are more secrets still. That beneath the facilities we build to protect the unknown lies something even we didn't expect. It's not just Area 51 that's rumored to have these depths. Similar stories have emerged from other military installations. Stories of elevators that go too far, of rooms without names, of entire underground cities, powered by fusion or something stranger, staffed by personnel who live beneath the surface for weeks at a time. Places without weather, without clocks, without windows. And yet, for all these stories, nothing concrete has ever been produced. No maps, no photos, no verifiable schematics. The rumors remain just that. And perhaps that's the most effective form of secrecy. Not a locked door, but an unanswered question. The phrase green room itself remains ambiguous. Some say it refers to a staging area, where personnel are psychologically screened before being allowed further into the base. A place where you're monitored, assessed, where your thoughts and reactions are catalogued. Others say it refers to a color-coded clearance level, that once you're in the green, you're in the inner circle. You don't ask questions, you don't offer information. You simply do the job and follow the protocol. A few describe the green room as something more abstract, a mental state, a condition, the moment when you understand what you're seeing, but realize you can never speak of it. When the weight of the truth settles on you, not like a burden, but like a contract, signed in silence. Whatever the green room is or isn't, it has become shorthand for the idea that the deepest truths are hidden not in plain sight, but in layers. That beyond every known room is another. That no matter how far you go, there's always another door, another level, another story just out of reach. And so, the myth persists. That beneath the dry lakebed, beneath the empty sky, beneath the blinking security cameras and unmarked vehicles, there is a world hidden from the world. A place of cold lights and quiet footsteps. Of secrets so heavy they had to be buried. You won't find it on any map. There are no coordinates, no satellite photos. Only whispers. A sense that somewhere, in a room no one talks about, the lights are still on, waiting. Captured Aliens and Majestic 12. Conspiracy theories about alien autopsies and secret committees. The first stories were whispered, unconfirmed, untraceable. They came from back rooms, from late-night radio shows, from wrinkled documents pulled from forgotten filing cabinets or slid under motel room doors. Stories of something not human, not terrestrial, captured and hidden away, somewhere remote, somewhere silent. They spoke of beings, small, grey, strange, recovered from crash sites in the desert, of bodies that were cold but intact, of government agents who arrived quickly, cleaned up the wreckage, and erased the scene like it had never happened. The details varied, but the pattern remained. Something fell, something was found, and someone made sure the world would never know. Over time, one name would become central to these claims, a name that, to this day, has never appeared in any official directory, never been acknowledged in any government press conference, and yet has been spoken by more conspiracy researchers than almost any other. Majestic 12, sometimes called MJ12. The name refers to an alleged secret committee of scientists, military leaders, and intelligence officials, said to have been established in 1947 by executive order of President Harry Truman. Its purpose: to investigate, manage, and contain all knowledge related to non-human technology and life forms recovered on Earth. According to the documents that first surfaced in the 1980s, Majestic 12 was born in the direct aftermath of the Roswell incident. The crash, they claimed, wasn't just of a weather balloon or a conventional aircraft. It was something else, something beyond explanation. And what was recovered wasn't just debris, but bodies, biological entities, some dead, some not. The documents described how the wreckage had been transported to a secure facility, where a hand-picked team would begin the slow, careful work of trying to understand it. There were mentions of sealed hangars, of cryogenic containment units, of metal that couldn't be cut, wires that had no ends, symbols no one could translate. And the bodies, frail, pale, with large heads and almond-shaped eyes, were studied under the harsh fluorescence of undisclosed labs. Autopsies were said to have taken place under strict security. No cameras, no notes, just hands, gloved and steady, cutting into the unknown. What was found inside, they say, didn't match any earthly anatomy. No lungs, no stomachs, no blood in the usual sense. Something different. Something that challenged everything we thought we knew about biology, about evolution, about ourselves. And above it all, watching, managing, and deciding what would be revealed, or more often, what wouldn't, was Majestic 12. Skeptics, of course, have long dismissed the MJ12 documents as forgeries, carefully crafted fakes meant to lure believers deeper into a maze of misinformation. The typewriter font, the language, the formatting. It's all been analysed, picked apart, debated in conferences and chat rooms and comment sections. But for every expert who calls the documents a hoax, there's another who insists that even if the papers are fabricated, the idea they represent might still be true. That somewhere, out of public view, a group like Majestic 12 does exist. Not necessarily by that name, not necessarily as described, but as a concept, a small, elite body, tasked with managing the single most destabilizing truth humanity might ever encounter, that we are not alone. According to some accounts, MJ12 wasn't just an advisory committee. It was a gatekeeper, a controller. Its members had full access to every piece of retrieved craft, every biological specimen, every recorded communication. They operated above the military, beyond oversight, answering only to the highest levels of government, if even that. Some say the group met in underground conference rooms, far beneath the surface of secure facilities. Others suggest they didn't meet at all, not in person. That communication was done through intermediaries, encrypted channels, code names, that the members were rotated out or in, depending on geopolitical needs, that some of them weren't even from the same country. There are names that surface again and again in the MJ12 lore. prominent physicists, generals with clearance levels above top secret, intelligence chiefs known for their discretion. Some of these individuals have denied involvement. Others are no longer living. But once a name appears in the orbit of MJ12, it tends to stay there, drawing in speculation like a gravity well. Over the years, fragments of information have emerged. Classified memos, strange photographs, anonymous testimonies. A few of the most chilling documents allegedly describe not just dead aliens, but living ones, housed in secure locations, communicated with to some limited degree, kept not as prisoners, but as specimens, subjects of long-term observation. These entities, described in varying levels of detail, are said to be emotionally distant, but intellectually advanced. They do not breathe as we do, they do not age as we do, and they do not speak. But they understand, and sometimes they respond. One recurring account suggests that a surviving being from the Roswell crash, nicknamed EBE, short for extraterrestrial biological entity, was held at a classified location for several years. Some claim it died of unknown causes. Others say it communicated key information about its origin, the nature of its craft, and its reason for visiting Earth. The most extraordinary claims suggest that this interaction formed the basis for a broader agreement. Some say a formal treaty between human authorities and an alien civilization. The details of this supposed exchange vary wildly, ranging from cooperation on technology to more sinister arrangements. But within the MJ12 narrative, it is always Majestic that oversees these interactions. Always Majestic that filters what humanity is allowed to know. Skeptics, again, argue that such stories are the product of overactive imagination, government disinformation, or psychological projection. That no such beings exist, no autopsies were performed, and no committee like Majestic 12 ever held a meeting, let alone a body. But the stories persist. Even as new generations grow up in a world where the phrase UFO has been replaced with UAP, and even as governments begin to admit that aerial anomalies do exist, the narrative threads of MJ12 remain. It appears in pop culture, in novels, in whispered conversations in internet forums late at night. It exists in that strange grey zone between official denial and cultural certainty. Some believe that Majestic 12 was never a fixed body at all, but a term applied to a shifting network, something modular, decentralized, adaptive. That the real genius of the operation is not in hiding the truth, but in creating so many versions of the truth that no one can say for sure what's real. It's also been suggested that the entire concept of MJ12 may itself be a form of disinformation, crafted by intelligence agencies not to deceive the public, but to distract them, to keep attention focused on aliens and autopsies, rather than on more terrestrial secrets, advanced propulsion systems, surveillance technology, biological experiments. That the truth is stranger than fiction only if you look in the wrong direction. And yet, even in that interpretation, there's an acknowledgement of manipulation, of deliberate obfuscation, of control. Whether Majestic 12 exists or not, its shadow hangs over every conversation about alien contact, technological suppression, and government silence. It's become a symbol for the hidden authority behind the curtain. A name without a face. A room without windows. A decision made, always, behind closed doors. So the question lingers. If beings from another world had been found, dead or alive, would we be told? If autopsies had been conducted, if scientists had studied the anatomy of something truly alien, would the findings ever be released? And if there was a group tasked with making sure that truth never saw daylight, would we even know it existed? Or would we only hear about it the way we always have, through whispers, through stories, through names like Majestic, names that never appear in the official record, but never seem to go away? The role of NASA and DARPA. advanced tech development, and overlaps with space research. In the quiet halls of innovation, in the sterile laboratories tucked deep inside defense compounds and aerospace centers, some of the most groundbreaking ideas humanity has ever pursued were not born from war or commerce, but from curiosity, from the simple yet boundless question, what if? While Area 51 has always been cloaked in secrecy, the mechanisms that surround it, the agencies, the think tanks, the research arms of the US government are more visible, and perhaps none have walked the tightrope between transparency and mystery, quite like NASA and DARPA. On the surface, they serve different masters. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was built for exploration, for science, for peaceful advancement of spaceflight and knowledge. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is, by contrast, born of conflict. A response to the Cold War, to Sputnik, to the fear of being left behind technologically. Its goal has always been dominance through innovation. Yet despite their origins, their work often converges. Behind the scenes, both agencies have dipped their hands into realms of advanced propulsion, artificial intelligence, unmanned flight, deep space telemetry, and materials science that seem, at times, decades ahead of civilian technology. It's in this overlap, the thin, blurry space between defense and discovery, that many believe Area 51 operates. Somewhere between the stratosphere and the stars, between secure airstrips and cosmic ambitions, lies a corridor of research that doesn't belong solely to Earth or space, but to both. To understand how Area 51 fits into this triangle of technology, you have to trace the story back to the 1950s and 60s, when spaceflight was still an idea more than a reality. When the US was racing to catch up with Soviet launches and trying to understand how far rockets, satellites, and unknown threats might one day reach. NASA and DARPA were, in many ways, twin offspring of the same moment in history. While NASA's public face focused on manned missions, telescopes, and planetary research, DARPA worked in the shadows, developing technologies that would ensure the US never again be surprised by a technological leap from a foreign power. In those early years, experimental aircraft were everywhere. X-planes that pushed the sound barrier, prototypes with no tail fins or traditional wings, vehicles that combined the rules of jet propulsion with ideas barely beyond the sketchpad. Some of these projects were tested at Edwards Air Force Base. Others, too sensitive or strange, found their way further north toward Groom Lake. Here, in the quiet of the Nevada desert, research teams could test technologies that were far too experimental for public scrutiny. New forms of propulsion, materials that bent radar, airframes designed for space-like altitudes. Even during peacetime, the military never stopped trying to outpace the future. DARPA would fund much of this work. Their budget, flexible, unclassified in general but obscure in detail, allowed them to funnel resources into projects whose names meant nothing to the public. Projects with code words, with abbreviations, with no official trail. One of DARPA's earliest and most famous endeavors was ARPANET, the predecessor to the modern internet. But beyond networking, the agency spent decades exploring how to manipulate the very physics of flight. Hypersonic engines, scramjets, anti-gravity concepts, field propulsion. Some of it stayed within the realm of engineering. Some of it strayed into the speculative. By the 1980s, DARPA's partnership with the Air Force and NASA deepened. The Space Shuttle program was well underway. Satellites circled the Earth in dense orbits, and somewhere, buried in contracts and patents, were proposals for vehicles that could take off like a plane, reach the edge of space, and return on command, without staging, without fuel loss, without a crew. These craft, sometimes called aerospace vehicles, existed in theory and occasionally on the drawing boards. Silent, fast, nearly invisible to radar. able to climb higher than any known aircraft, and perhaps capable of short bursts into low Earth orbit. Some suggest prototypes were tested at Area 51 under different names: Aurora, Brilliant Buzzard, Black Star. Names without confirmation, with trails that vanish into redacted documents. NASA, while publicly distant from military secrecy, often shared personnel, data, and sometimes even launch facilities with DARPA-backed projects. It's been noted by researchers that many early NASA engineers had overlapping clearance with Department of Defense assignments, that certain launch windows and telemetry stations were blacked out for unknown use, that flights with ambiguous payloads departed at night from airfields unmarked on FAA charts. Even today, both agencies operate at the edge of known science. NASA explores solar propulsion, radiation shielding, and interstellar communications, while DARPA pursues artificial intelligence pilots, robotic swarms, and quantum sensor networks. The gap between them isn't so much a wall as it is a veil, one of intent, not capability. Some believe that Area 51 serves as the experimental crucible where ideas from both sides converge, a neutral ground where space research and defense innovation are stripped of public narrative and tested purely on their potential. In this theory, one hangar might house a next-generation drone with adaptive camouflage, while another contains a gravity mitigation platform designed to simulate deep space travel without thrust. Others go further, suggesting that the lines between the agencies themselves have blurred, that some DARPA projects are launched under NASA missions or vice versa, that reverse-engineered craft, if such things exist, are studied through DARPA's theoretical physics teams, then reintegrated into aerospace design frameworks under civilian guise. The idea isn't new. During the development of the U-2 spy plane, for example, NASA often provided the cover story. Test flights over Nevada were officially labeled as high-altitude weather research. A NASA registration number was painted on the fuselage. Meanwhile, deep inside the base, CIA operatives monitored every second of flight data, every roll, every tremble of the airframe. This model of dual-purpose cooperation has likely endured. Perhaps some of the technologies being tested today, under the guise of aerospace research, are in fact decades ahead of what we publicly understand. And perhaps the boundaries between truth, fiction, defense, and discovery have grown intentionally vague. It's worth noting that NASA and DARPA have both expressed interest in theoretical propulsion systems that would have once been called science fiction: nuclear thermal rockets, antimatter engines, and even warp drives. Not all of these are purely speculative. Research papers exist, peer-reviewed models, simulations. The energy requirements are still astronomical, but the fact that they're being explored at all speaks volumes. And if these technologies were to progress past theory, if someone had found a way to make them functional, even in miniature, where would they be tested? Where would you house a vehicle that defies the laws of known thrust? Where would you run propulsion diagnostics without inviting 1,000 questions? Where could you control access, monitor data, and limit exposure all in one place? The answer, for many, is clear. Area 51, a place designed not for comfort or convenience, but for control, for compartmentalization, for separating what is possible from what is permitted. A location where joint agency projects can be conducted without interference, without leaks, and without the need to explain. And so the dance continues. NASA publishes papers about Martian geology. DARPA releases cryptic project titles about autonomous threat detection. But somewhere, between the lines of what's disclosed and what's denied, something more may be unfolding. Quiet tests, dimly lit runways, engineers who don't speak about their work even to their families, data collected, then buried, reviewed by names that never appear on conference brochures or academic rosters. Is it space research? Or is it defense? Or is it both? Are we chasing the stars? Or protecting ourselves from what might come from them? Or is the goal even stranger, to become indistinguishable from what we fear? to develop technologies so advanced they mimic the very phenomena we once thought alien. No one knows for sure, and perhaps that is the point. In a world of shifting alliances, quantum computing, and deep space probes, the only constant is secrecy. Not to hide failure, but to protect progress. Not to obscure the past, but to prepare for what's next. Somewhere in that equation, between rocket trails and radar signatures, between the mission logs and the unexplained blips in the sky, is Area 51, a place where the goals of NASA and the ambitions of DARPA may quietly overlap, where science and defense shake hands in silence, then get back to work. Because the future doesn't arrive with announcements. It's built in hangars, launched in darkness, and tested where no one is allowed to watch. The 1995 lawsuit and toxic secrets, environmental damage, workers' health issues, and cover-up claims. For decades, Area 51 existed only as a whisper, an absence, a blank space on maps that stretched across miles of Nevada desert, but showed nothing, just tan earth, endless scrub, and a name that no one officially used. Aircraft came and went. Lights blinked in the distance. Fences were built, cameras installed, warnings posted. But nothing was ever confirmed. It was a phantom base, a rumor wrapped in silence. And yet, for all the mystery surrounding advanced technology and secret aircraft, the first time Area 51 was dragged out of the shadows into legal daylight had nothing to do with flying saucers. It had to do with garbage, with ash, with barrels and smoke and sickness, with the question of what happens when secrecy isn't just about hiding ideas, but about hiding harm. The story began not in a classified hangar or a hidden vault, but in the bodies of men who had once worked the night shifts, who had driven trucks down Groom Lake's back roads, who had handled chemicals they were never allowed to name. Over time, those men got sick, skin lesions, liver damage, respiratory failure, mysterious illnesses that progressed without explanation, until one by one, their health collapsed. They weren't pilots, they weren't scientists. They were support staff, maintenance workers, truck drivers, janitors, hired to manage the behind-the-scenes labor of a facility where every task came with a confidentiality clause. The men didn't know what they were handling. They didn't ask. Most of them had families. They needed the paycheck. And the rules were clear. Ask fewer questions and keep your mouth shut. But over time, as their conditions worsened, they began to talk, quietly at first, then more openly. They compared symptoms, noticed patterns, and gradually a picture began to emerge of a site where, beneath the veil of national security, something had gone very wrong. What they described was a practice of open-air burning, trenches dug deep into the desert soil, filled with unidentified chemicals, solvents, metal shavings, and composite scraps from experimental aircraft. The materials were ignited without filtration or proper containment, sending black smoke curling up into the sky. Sometimes the fires were white hot. Sometimes they burned for days. Workers recalled being ordered to stand nearby during these burns, to stir the ash, to unload barrels marked only with numbers or symbols. Some reported watching liquid waste being dumped directly into unlined pits. Others said they were told never to touch the residue that formed on the edges of the burn zones, residue that, in some cases, burned through gloves or gave off a sickly sweet smell. In 1994, a lawsuit was filed against the US government by a group of former workers and the widows of others who had died. The claim was simple, yet staggering, that toxic materials had been handled improperly, that they had been burned or buried without regulation, and that those actions had directly led to severe illness and death. But there was a problem. Because the work had taken place at Area 51, and because the site did not officially exist, No information could be confirmed. The workers couldn't even say where they had been. Documents were classified, site names were redacted, materials were listed under project codes with no explanation. In a strange legal twist, the plaintiffs found themselves unable to prove what chemicals they had been exposed to, because even asking the government to confirm the existence of those chemicals risked exposing national security secrets. The case made headlines, not because of the alien stories that had long swirled around Area 51, but because of the real human cost of unchecked secrecy. It forced the public to consider that behind the tales of sources and stealth, there was another kind of danger. One less thrilling, one more human, one rooted in toxic exposure, negligence, and silence. In court, the government argued that releasing any further details about operations at the base would compromise national defense. Even identifying the contractors who had overseen the waste disposal could reveal classified relationships. The Department of Defense invoked the state secrets privilege, a legal doctrine that allows the government to block the release of information in lawsuits if disclosure would harm national security. The case reached the Supreme Court, and the court, by declining to hear it, effectively upheld the government's stance. The workers received no compensation, no recognition. Their claims were never proven or disproven, just buried, like the chemicals themselves. In the aftermath, environmental watchdog groups began raising louder concerns. If open-air burning of classified waste was truly taking place at Area 51, what were the long-term effects on the land, on the water table, on wildlife, on neighboring communities downwind? Satellite imagery seemed to show scorched trenches near the perimeter of the base. Analysis of wind patterns indicated that particulate matter could have drifted far beyond the restricted zone. But without access, without oversight, without acknowledgement that the site even existed, there was little anyone could do. The government's refusal to comment on Area 51 extended even to questions of safety and legality. Requests filed under the Freedom of Information Act were denied, or returned with entire pages blacked out. Former EPA officials admitted, off the record, that they had never been allowed to inspect Groom Lake. It wasn't just a matter of security, it was a matter of jurisdiction. The base, it seemed, operated under a different set of rules. Some former workers, emboldened by the lawsuit, began to speak more freely. They described being given no protective equipment, no warnings, no access to medical records. One man claimed he had been exposed to a substance that melted through concrete. Another described a white powder that blistered skin on contact. Still others reported seizures, memory loss, and neurological damage with no clear diagnosis. Medical experts who reviewed the testimonies noted the patterns: exposure to heavy metals, solvent toxicity, long-term inhalation of polycarbonates and volatile compounds. The symptoms lined up. But without names, samples, or paper trails, the diagnoses remained speculative. In the years following the lawsuit, small reforms were made to whistleblower protections in defense contracting. Certain protocols were updated. Oversight mechanisms were strengthened in theory. But when it came to Area 51 itself, the door remained shut. And so, the base continued to operate in silence, its airstrips lengthening, its hangars expanding, its footprint growing steadily year by year, all without ever publicly addressing what may have happened to the people who once worked its furnaces and filled its trucks. For many, the story of the 1995 lawsuit is one of betrayal. Not the betrayal of fantastical hopes or alien secrets, but the betrayal of ordinary people who did what they were told, served without complaint, and suffered quietly for it. People who believed in the cause, who followed the rules, and who, in the end, were asked to carry the cost of secrecy in their blood. It raises difficult questions. What happens when a need for national security collides with the rights of individuals? When confidentiality supersedes accountability? When a place is so classified that even those harmed by it cannot speak its name? The workers at Groom Lake didn't ask about flying saucers. They weren't concerned with theories or sightings. Their battles were more immediate, more painful, and ultimately more forgotten. Today, their case exists only as a footnote in the legal record, but it left behind a quiet legacy, one that reminds us that secrecy has a weight, that behind every secured gate and blanked-out file, there are real people, real consequences, and that sometimes the darkest secrets aren't what you hide in hangars, but what you bury in the earth. Area 51, today, still active? The desert wind still whispers secrets over the salt flat. Groom Lake remains as active as ever, its runway lines stretching across the Nevada basin, etched like veins into the dry landscape. Officially designated as Homey Airport, the base continues to operate under the umbrella of the Air Force Test Center, tucked within a perimeter so tightly controlled that even acknowledging its boundaries comes with legal warnings. No drones, no photography, no curiosity allowed. Surrounded by mountains and natural barriers, the base remains a fortress of silence. Satellite photos, while publicly available in low resolution, offer only surface-level glimpses, blurs of buildings, airstrips, and carefully positioned structures. Aircraft come and go beneath the cover of darkness. Convoys of white buses, escorted by nondescript security vehicles, ferry employees to and from the site along restricted access roads. And overhead, the skies are locked, permanently closed to commercial air traffic. Still, new signs of activity continue to emerge. In recent years, observers have noted significant upgrades near the northern edge of the base. Freshly constructed hangars, larger than any previously recorded, now dominate sections of the runway. These new structures appear designed to house aircraft with considerable wingspans, raising speculation about the types of projects being tested within. Long trenches have been carved into the earth, likely for electrical or data infrastructure. Power substations have been expanded, and air ventilation systems, massive, industrial, and new, have been installed on facility rooftops. All of this suggests movement, growth, expansion. Despite the layers of secrecy, there are still small windows into the present. Transport flights, known unofficially as Janet flights, still run daily between Las Vegas and Groom Lake. These unmarked Boeing 737s, painted white with a single red stripe, ferry government and contractor personnel to the facility each morning and return them each evening. They use a private terminal at McCarran Airport and fly along a corridor that has remained unchanged for decades. These flights, as mundane as they might appear from the outside, are evidence of ongoing operations. So too are the infrared cameras still mounted along the perimeter, the motion sensors buried beneath desert soil, and the ever-present camo dudes who patrol the boundary in dark SUVs, always watching, rarely intervening unless someone gets too close. Inside the base, what happens remains a tightly guarded secret. But military analysts, satellite imagery specialists, and civilian researchers have pieced together clues. Many believe Area 51 is now home to next-generation drone testing. Hypersonic aircraft, unmanned aerial systems capable of near-orbital flight, and stealth platforms so advanced that their radar signature is indistinguishable from birds or weather. There's also speculation that the site plays a role in foreign aircraft evaluation, reverse engineering captured or recovered vehicles from adversarial nations. Over the years, it's been quietly acknowledged that the US has flown modified versions of Soviet MiGs at the base, studying their performance, vulnerabilities, and radar profiles. Today, that same practice likely continues, updated for modern threats. In addition to hardware, there are whispers of software, artificial intelligence programs capable of autonomous flight, advanced pattern recognition for surveillance, AI-assisted countermeasure systems. Area 51 is not just about the airframes anymore, it's about the brains behind them. Recent earthworks and construction around the base hint at subterranean expansions. While impossible to confirm, it's believed that data centers, maintenance bays, and testing labs extend below the desert floor. Reinforced bunkers, blast-proof laboratories, possibly even underground runways for deploying assets without revealing them to satellites. And still, there's no formal acknowledgement of any of this. Officially, Area 51 remains part of the Nevada Test and Training Range. It's a place for flight testing, for aerospace development, and for national defense activities. The details end there. No press releases, no media tours, no photos of ribbon cuttings or staff ceremonies, no holiday parties shared on social media. It is a black site in the purest sense, operating in the blank spaces between lines of communication. So, is it still active? Undoubtedly. New roads are paved, new vehicles enter. The infrastructure is maintained, upgraded, and expanded. The personnel, carefully screened and sworn to lifelong secrecy, continue their work in silence. Unlike the Cold War days of U-2 and SR-71 testing, the technologies now being developed may never be made public. Their designs may never enter commercial aerospace. Their blueprints may never be declassified. In an age of cyber warfare, electronic surveillance, and orbital defense, many of the craft under development might not look like planes at all. They might be swarms, satellites, hypersonic missiles, systems of communication and evasion that defy traditional definitions. The landscape has changed, but the mission, it seems, has not. Area 51 remains a hub for the unknown, not because of aliens or otherworldly visitors, but because it thrives in the space between innovation and secrecy, a place where the next generation of defense is sculpted away from public eyes, where failure can happen in silence, and where success, should it ever be used, will appear without warning, without fanfare, and without attribution. In a world of 24/7 media, GPS tagging, and real-time tracking, the idea of such a place still functioning feels anachronistic. And yet, it works. It endures. Its mystique protects it as much as any fence. Every so often, a flash of light in the night sky will spark headlines. A new hangar will be spotted from a distant ridge. An anonymous tip will suggest something strange is flying again over Groom Lake. But nothing is confirmed. Nothing ever is. That perhaps is the most consistent thing about Area 51. It evolves. It adapts. It disappears when you try to look too closely. And in doing so, it fulfills its purpose: to test, to protect, and to remain unseen. The base is still active. The work continues. And the silence says everything. The Storm Area 51 movement, the 2019 internet phenomenon, and what actually happened. It started, as so many things do now, with a joke. A single event posted quietly on Facebook, almost in jest, late one summer evening. The title was absurd: Storm Area 51, they can't stop all of us. The premise? Equally ridiculous. If enough people charged the gates of the world's most secretive military installation, surely someone could slip through. Surely, they reasoned, someone would reach the truth. The post invited users to gather at the perimeter of Area 51 on September 20th, 2019, and to run toward the base en masse. The language was playful, laced with memes, sarcasm, and half-serious enthusiasm. It referenced Naruto running, a term borrowed from Japanese anime, describing a character sprinting with arms stretched behind. It invited users to see them aliens, and within days, something strange happened. The internet took notice. Within a week, tens of thousands of people had clicked attending, then hundreds of thousands. News outlets picked it up. Interviews were requested. Late-night hosts cracked jokes. Government officials, first amused, then concerned, began issuing quiet statements. And the joke, once confined to a corner of the internet, had now spread globally. By mid-August, over 2 million people had marked themselves as going. The post's creator, a college student from California named Matty Roberts, was overwhelmed. What had begun as a meme had spiraled into a cultural event, and now the world was watching to see if anyone would actually follow through. For those who had been tracking Area 51 for years, the sudden attention was surreal. The base had long existed in whispers, rumors about reverse-engineered craft, black projects, and clandestine technologies. Its secrecy had always been protected by fear, distance, and silence. Now, it was a punchline, a destination, a viral movement. As the date drew closer, authorities took action. The US Air Force issued a rare public warning. They reminded the public that trespassing on military property was illegal, that Area 51 was an active training site, that security forces would not hesitate to defend it. Local law enforcement, particularly in the small Nevada towns nearest the base, Rachel and Hicko, began to prepare for an influx of visitors. These towns, dusty and remote, had populations barely over 100. They weren't built for crowds. They weren't built for attention. But with national headlines predicting thousands of attendees, they scrambled to set up infrastructure, emergency services, food vendors, water stations. Tents were raised, signs were painted, and slowly, people began to arrive. They came in campers, on motorcycles, in rented vans. Some came dressed as aliens, others in tinfoil hats. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by irony. Many admitted they had no intention of breaching the base. They simply wanted to be part of something, to stand on the edge of the unknown, even if only for a night. What unfolded on September 20th wasn't a raid. It was something stranger, something uniquely 21st century. Roughly 1,500 to 2,000 people showed up, far fewer than the millions who had clicked attending, but still more than the desert towns had ever hosted at once. They gathered at the gates. They posed for pictures. They waved signs. Some attempted to run, playfully, in the now famous Naruto pose. Others held hands and stood in silence, gazing past the fences toward the mountains beyond. There were a few arrests, mostly for trespassing, but there was no violence, no real confrontation. The storm never came. Instead, it felt like a festival, a moment of collective absurdity, a surreal gathering under the stars. Local residents were divided. Some welcomed the attention and business. Others found it invasive. One motel, the Little Ailey Inn, became the central hub for the movement. They served burgers, sold merchandise, hosted music. What was once a novelty stop for UFO tourists had, overnight, become the epicenter of an international joke with real-world consequences. The Air Force, for its part, remained silent. No jets were scrambled, no weapons drawn. But surveillance drones reportedly monitored the perimeter. Armed guards stayed hidden, but ever present. It was a delicate balance. Maintain security, but avoid escalation. The last thing anyone wanted was a tragedy born from a meme. In the days that followed, media outlets declared the movement a success, not because secrets were uncovered, but because it demonstrated something deeper: the internet's power to shape reality. A joke had manifested into tents on desert soil, into thousands of strangers gathering for a shared wink at the sky. Critics dismissed it as juvenile, a waste of resources, a distraction. But for those who stood there, just outside the razor wire and cameras, the event held something intangible, a mix of humor, rebellion, curiosity, and cultural performance. It was, in some strange way, a tribute to secrecy, to imagination, to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was something beyond the fence worth seeing. Some participants described a kind of spiritual experience, standing in the desert beneath the Milky Way, knowing they were feet away from one of the most restricted zones on Earth. It didn't matter that they didn't get in. What mattered was that they came, that they dared to stand on the edge and ask, even playfully, what if? In the months that followed, the hype faded. The Facebook page was taken down. Organizers moved on. But the story endured. Storm Area 51 became a cultural reference, a shorthand for absurd viral movements and internet power. It spawned memes, songs, documentaries, and even a mobile game. And while nothing about the base changed, its fences still intact, its skies still guarded, the event left a small ripple. For one moment, the world turned its eyes toward the silence of the Nevada desert. Not with suspicion, not with fear, but with laughter. It's easy to dismiss the whole thing as meaningless, just another internet prank. But perhaps it reveals something more fundamental. A longing for transparency, a hunger for answers, a desire to make contact, not just with what lies beyond the stars, but with each other. Through humor, through spectacle, through gathering in the name of the unknown. The fences still stand, the signs still warn, the guards still watch. But now, woven into the myth of Area 51, is a strange chapter where the world looked toward it, not with dread or conspiracy, but with shared, harmless curiosity. They didn't storm it, they celebrated it, not because they expected to find aliens, but because they wanted to believe they might. What's beneath the surface? If Area 51 is a mystery on the surface, then what lies beneath it is the subject of even deeper speculation. For years, rumors have swirled not just about secret aircraft and shadow projects, but about entire subterranean worlds. Massive underground facilities, deeply buried bunkers, and interconnected tunnels stretching for hundreds of miles beneath the desert. These theories fall under a term whispered in fringe communities and occasionally echoed by former military insiders: D.U.M.Bs, deep underground military bases. The idea is simple, yet staggering. Hidden beneath some of America's most secure facilities are sprawling complexes, vaulted chambers reinforced by thick concrete and steel, lit by artificial sunlight, ventilated by nuclear-grade air filters, and connected by high-speed rail systems. These bases, it's said, are built to house advanced technologies, clandestine personnel, exotic materials, and in some versions of the theory, non-human life forms. But let's begin with what we know, what is possible, even plausible. Since the Cold War era, the US government has poured billions into subterranean defense infrastructure. Facilities like Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, famously designed to withstand nuclear attack, are real. NORAD's command center, buried beneath 2,000 feet of granite, was built during a time when the threat of intercontinental ballistic missiles made underground protection a necessity. There are missile silos across the Midwest, communications bunkers in the Appalachian Hills, and emergency command centers scattered beneath unnamed ridges. Going underground for many decades was not a theory, it was policy. And then there's the Nevada test site itself, a vast expanse of desert riddled with craters from decades of underground nuclear tests. Below that ground lies a labyrinth of tunnels, some natural, others man-made, formed by collapses, test shafts, and blast cavities. It is not unreasonable to believe that facilities built in this region would have had to contend with and possibly use this subterranean environment. That brings us back to Area 51. Satellite imagery of the base shows only part of the story. Runways, hangars, a few clustered buildings. But the visible infrastructure seems oddly limited for a facility tasked with developing some of the most advanced technologies in the world. Where are the labs, the storage facilities, the administrative buildings for hundreds of staff? Some believe the answer lies underground. The theory goes like this. Beneath the Groom Lake, Salt Flat lies a multi-tiered facility, descending level by level like an inverted skyscraper. The upper levels house traditional support infrastructure, generators, water treatment, personnel quarters. Below that, testing chambers, materials labs, and secured vaults. And deeper still, the unknown. Whistleblowers over the years have added fuel to the fire. Some former engineers have anonymously claimed to have worked in sub-levels at Groom Lake, accessed only by elevators that require biometric scans and security clearances far beyond standard military levels. Others speak of magnetic levitation trains that move silently through sealed tunnels, connecting Groom Lake to other sites across the country, most notably Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, Los Alamos in New Mexico, and even Denver International Airport. These underground networks, if they exist, would represent one of the most ambitious engineering feats in history, logistically, financially, and technically. Constructing deep underground bases is not easy, especially in remote desert locations where supply lines are limited and secrecy must be maintained. But proponents of the D.U.M.B theory argue that when it comes to black budget programs, projects so classified they don't appear in official appropriations, anything is possible. Some of the most persistent claims point to a mountain near the base known as Papoose Range. It is here that Bob Lazar, the same man who brought Area 51 into the public consciousness in the 1980s, claimed the government housed captured extraterrestrial craft in a facility known as S4. Lazar described it as a hidden installation built into the side of a mountain, accessible only through camouflaged doors and embedded into the rock face like a natural feature. Skeptics have long challenged Lazar's claims, but the imagery he conjured of elevator shafts descending into the earth, of corridors lined with reinforced doors, of laboratories buried under tons of Nevada rock, has endured in the public imagination. Geologically, the Nevada region is suited for tunneling. Its dry climate, relatively stable bedrock, and lack of water tables make it easier to bore into than wetter, more tectonically active areas. Mining operations in nearby regions have tunneled deep into the earth for decades. The technology exists. And if it exists, could it have been used for more than just mining? Another strange clue comes from procurement records. Over the years, defense contractors known to work in subterranean excavation, companies that specialize in boring machines, tunnel reinforcement, and underground ventilation systems, have received undisclosed contracts near Groom Lake. Of course, these could be for any number of reasons, but in a world where everything above ground is monitored, perhaps the next frontier of secrecy had to go below it. Then there are the stories from civilians, ranchers and hikers who have wandered too close to restricted areas and described hearing strange vibrations beneath their feet, low rumbles with no visible source, the sound of engines, faint and distant, humming through the ground. Others have claimed to see small hills briefly illuminated at night, as if light were escaping from hidden vents or exhaust ports buried in the earth. Most compelling, perhaps, is the pattern of secrecy itself. If you're building something massive above ground, it's hard to hide. But underground, you control everything. No satellite can see it. No drone can film it. Construction can happen 24 hours a day, unobserved, uninterrupted. And if you needed to move sensitive materials, experimental craft, recovered debris, or exotic technologies you didn't want even your allies to know about, an underground system would be the safest way to do it. Yet for all the theories, no concrete evidence has emerged. No photos, no blueprints, no leaked schematics. Just stories, suggestions, patterns. But that's the nature of Area 51, and of D.U.M.Bs in general. They exist, if they exist at all, in the shadow space between possibility and proof, between what we imagine and what we can confirm. And perhaps that's the point. If you were building the most secure facility on Earth, wouldn't you want people looking at the sky while everything important happened far below their feet? In the end, we are left with silence. The ground may hold its secrets. It may cradle entire laboratories. It may stretch downward into levels that house the truth about technologies we cannot yet name. Or it may be nothing more than rock and dust, layered over with decades of myth. Either way, beneath the surface of the earth, just like the surface of the mystery, we see only what we're allowed to see. The rest waits below, quiet, undisturbed, and very likely by design. Debunking versus believing. Scientific skepticism, evidence, and psychological elements. For every whispered tale of hidden spacecraft, every account of reverse-engineered propulsion, every blurry light spotted over the Nevada desert, there has always been someone standing on the other side of the story, a scientist, a skeptic, a voice that says, "Let's examine this carefully." The debate between belief and disbelief at Area 51 is not a simple one. It doesn't come down to who is right and who is wrong. Instead, it reveals something much more fundamental about the way we search for meaning in a world so often shrouded in ambiguity. It is a dance between two instincts, our deep craving for mystery and our equally deep desire for proof. Skeptics argue that the stories surrounding Area 51 are, at their core, a product of pattern recognition run amok, that humans are wired to look for explanations where none may exist. A flicker in the night sky becomes a craft, a rumor becomes a narrative, and a facility devoted to experimental aircraft testing becomes, over time, the imagined home of every secret we can't explain. They point to Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, and in many cases, the simple explanation is this. Area 51 is a site for testing next-generation aircraft, and because these projects are secretive, they are misidentified, misunderstood, and mythologized. Radar-deflecting planes, advanced drones, high-speed spycraft, all of these are extraordinary by design, and to the untrained eye, they might very well look like something from another world. But that, say the skeptics, does not mean they are. From a scientific standpoint, the idea of extraterrestrial life is not dismissed outright. In fact, many scientists agree that in a universe as vast and ancient as ours, it is statistically probable that life exists somewhere beyond Earth. The disagreement lies not in whether alien life could exist, but whether it has visited here, and if so, whether any evidence of that has ever been conclusively found. No crashed sources, no verified materials, no unambiguous footage, just anecdotes, just claims. Scientists rely on reproducibility, falsifiability, and evidence that can be tested independently and objectively. And so far, despite decades of claims, no one has been able to offer proof that satisfies those standards. No sample of alien material has ever been confirmed. No propulsion system has been recovered and analyzed by a third party. Nothing that would hold up under peer review. But then, on the other side of the debate are the believers, and their belief is not as simple as gullibility. For many, it comes from direct experience. They've seen lights that defy explanation. They've heard stories from people they trust. They've connected the dots between strange disappearances, inconsistencies in government reports, and whispered claims by insiders who risked everything to speak out. For some, belief is less about evidence and more about probability. The government has lied before, they argue. They've hidden projects in the past. They've suppressed information, withheld documents, redacted truths. So why wouldn't they do it again? Belief, in this context, becomes an act of faith, but also of logic. A quiet defiance of official narratives that have, at times, proven to be wrong. After all, it took until 2013 for the US government to even admit that Area 51 existed at all. If they denied that for decades, what else might still be hidden? Psychologists studying belief systems suggest that conspiracy theories, especially ones involving hidden knowledge or forbidden truths, fulfill an emotional need. They offer clarity in a chaotic world. They provide a structure, a reason, a shape to uncertainty. For those who feel powerless, the idea that someone else is in control, even secretly, can paradoxically be comforting. It's not that people want to believe in lies. It's that they want to believe in something. And Area 51 offers that in abundance. A blank space on the map. A symbol of ultimate secrecy. A screen onto which we can project every unknown. It becomes whatever we need it to be. A testing ground. A vault. A prison. A sanctuary. A lie. A truth. It is a mirror, reflecting our fears, our hopes, and our questions. The debate between debunking and believing often becomes deeply personal. To the skeptic, belief without evidence is a slippery slope, one that leads to paranoia, delusion, and the rejection of reality. To the believer, skepticism can feel like willful blindness, a refusal to see what's right in front of us, simply because it doesn't fit into a tidy framework. And yet, in that tension, something remarkable happens. The debate itself fuels curiosity. It drives people to dig, to read, to research, to share. Area 51 becomes not just a topic, but a gateway into science, history, politics, and psychology. Whether someone believes or not, they're drawn to the mystery. That's the power of a symbol. In recent years, the line between skeptic and believer has blurred even further. Former government officials have spoken out about unidentified aerial phenomena with characteristics beyond known aircraft. The US Navy has released footage showing objects with no visible propulsion, moving in ways that challenge conventional physics. Committees in Congress have demanded more transparency. Suddenly, those who were once labeled conspiracy theorists are finding themselves echoed, at least in part, by respected members of the intelligence community. And that leads to a strange paradox. The more we learn, the more we realize how little we truly know. Perhaps the divide between debunking and believing is not so wide after all. Perhaps it's a spectrum, with curiosity on one end and conviction on the other. Most of us fall somewhere in between. We want answers, but we also want wonder. We crave the truth, but we're not always sure how to find it, or how to recognize it when it appears. In the quiet, between the arguments and the interviews and the analysis, one truth remains constant. Something is happening at Area 51. Something has always been happening there. Whether that something is simply advanced aviation research or something far more extraordinary, we may never know. But the search itself, the questioning, the challenging, the storytelling, is part of what makes us human. We look at the sky and we wonder. We look at the silence and we ask. Skeptic or believer, we are united by that same drive. To see, to know, to understand. And maybe, in the end, that's what matters most. The legacy of mystery. Why Area 51 remains the ultimate symbol of secrecy and the unknown. There are places in the world that seem larger than the land they occupy. You won't find them marked boldly on maps. They don't draw tourists in droves like famous cities or wonders of the natural world. Yet they linger in our collective imagination, powerful and persistent. They haunt late-night conversations, fill pages of books and threads on internet forums. They are whispered, not shouted, concealed, not displayed. And few places embody that mystique quite like Area 51. After all the stories, the speculations, the photographs and denials and disclosures, the question still remains. Why does Area 51 continue to hold such a powerful grip on the modern imagination? Perhaps the answer lies not just in what the base is, but in what it represents. At its core, Area 51 is a paradox. It's both real and unreal. A physical place you can stand outside of, and yet one that exists more vividly in fiction than in reality. Its fences are made of steel and sand, but the ideas they contain are intangible, woven from secrecy, possibility, and the hunger for truth. It is, above all else, a mirror, one that reflects our deepest cultural preoccupations. For some, it reflects the power and reach of the modern state, the understanding that there are systems and hierarchies at work far beyond what we see or vote on or comprehend. The base is a symbol of hidden governance, of quiet control, of the machinery that hums behind the curtain while we go about our daily lives. It's comforting and disturbing in equal measure, the belief that someone, somewhere, knows more than they're telling us. For others, it's a symbol of something more spiritual, a monument to the unknown, the edge of the map where dragons used to be drawn. In a world where most mysteries have been solved, most corners charted, Area 51 stands out as one of the last great what-ifs. What if we're not alone? What if technology exists that could change everything? What if we've already touched something alien, and it's hidden just out of sight? It stirs the imagination because it is designed not to be understood. Its lack of transparency invites projection, and projection is a powerful thing. We fill in the blanks with stories, and those stories take root, spreading through generations, across continents, and into pop culture. Movies, books, TV shows, video games, t-shirts, songs. Somewhere along the way, Area 51 stopped being a location and became an archetype. It is the modern forbidden city, the holy site of seekers, skeptics, and true believers alike. A desert Vatican for the Church of the Unknown. And it doesn't matter whether you think it holds spacecraft or simply prototypes. The fact that you don't know for certain, that is the fuel. Mystery, by its nature, demands preservation. It resists resolution. Each official statement, each redacted document, each grainy satellite image serves not to clarify, but to deepen the fog. In that way, Area 51 is self-sustaining. The more we learn, the more we want to know. The clearer the outline, the more vivid the shadow. Even its silence is expressive, a kind of performance, a refusal to comment that says more than any press release ever could. And we, as observers, interpret that silence through our own biases, reading into it meaning, agenda, or revelation. But perhaps there is something else, something deeper, that explains why it endures. Because Area 51 doesn't just symbolize secrecy, it symbolizes potential. In that isolated basin, we project the hope that something amazing might exist, that somewhere behind blast-proof doors and security checkpoints, there's a technology or discovery so profound that it could change the course of human history. A new energy source, a new understanding of physics, a message from another world, or simply a way of flying that defies everything we know. In a world worn thin by overexposure, surveillance, and the constant churn of news cycles, the idea that something could be hidden well, something large, something real, something important, is both shocking and oddly reassuring. Because if mystery still exists, then so does wonder. And we need wonder, especially now. We need to believe that not everything has been solved or spoiled or revealed, that there are still puzzles worth solving, questions worth asking, places worth imagining. For some, Area 51 is a reminder that government secrets are dangerous, that unchecked power can hide too much. For others, it's proof that we're not alone, that something beyond the stars has already reached out and been quietly ushered into the most secure hangars on Earth. But whether you believe the official version or the whispered one, whether you picture engineers or extraterrestrials walking its corridors, the power of Area 51 comes from its ambiguity. We may never know what's hidden there, and maybe that's the point, because Area 51 is no longer just a base. It is a story, one told and retold across generations. It evolves with the times. In the Cold War, it was the home of spy planes. In the 1980s, it became the epicenter of alien lore. In the digital age, it became a meme, a movement, a symbol. And still, the fences stand. The lights glow faintly in the night. The airspace remains restricted, and the story continues. That story is not just about what we believe. It's about why we believe. It's about our relationship to the unknown. It's about curiosity and control. About faith and fear. About how much we're willing to accept on trust, and how far we're willing to go to pull back the curtain. So tonight, as you rest your head, as the world outside your window grows quiet, let your mind wander, just a little. Imagine the dry winds over Groom Lake, the hush of the salt flats, the stillness of distant ridgelines under a canopy of stars. Imagine the hidden doors, the long corridors, the strange objects buried deep in the earth. Imagine the voices lowered to whispers, the clearance levels marked in red, the stories told in fragments and half-truths. You don't have to believe in all of it, but it's okay to wonder, because mystery is not an absence of truth. It's an invitation to look, to listen, to dream. And in a world growing ever louder, maybe the most powerful thing we can do is to be still and imagine what lies just beyond the edge of what we know. That is the legacy of Area 51, and perhaps it always will be. I hope you enjoyed tonight's sleep story, exploring the entire legacy of Area 51, from its secretive birth in the Cold War era to the testing of silent aircraft over Groom Lake, the rise of alien conspiracies, whistleblower claims, underground base theories, government secrecy, and the enduring question of what might still lie hidden behind those desert fences. If you're still awake, that's perfectly okay. Just let your mind drift like desert wind across the empty salt flats. There's no need to hold on to any thoughts now. Just let them fade like stars at dawn. And if you'd like to continue your journey into rest, you can always explore more of our peaceful sleep stories. From ancient myths to historical mysteries, each one designed to help you relax and fall gently into deep, restorative sleep. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Wherever you are in the world, I wish you a calm and restful night. Sleep well.